Hello everybody, sorry if I was on mute there. My apologies for the sound, and apologies for being late, so let me cover that again. We've had some internet problems here in San Jose today. That's why we weren't on at 4 o'clock as promised. We rescheduled for 5, and we missed that by a few minutes. So hopefully the audio is working. We are told that there are going to be some buffering issues today because we are still having sort of a bad stream here from Comcast, so apologies on all those fronts. And hopefully my voice sounds okay for me today too. So the first thing I wanted to cover before we dive on into your questions, which hopefully you're all leaving there down there below, is the awkward subject of reliability. I get a lot of questions about reliability in modern cars, and what does it mean? What's bad? What's good? A lot of this tends to be referenced around certain brands, and I'm not going to name specific names here at the beginning, but I'm sure we'll all dive into that in the end. And it's, should I buy this, should I buy that? I'm worried about reliability. Well, the first thing to remember is that the delta between reliable, quote unquote, and unreliable in modern days is actually very, very small. It's much smaller than it has been in decades and decades and decades. So while you could say something like a Range Rover is going to be less reliable than a Lexus, what does that really mean to you as a customer? Well, it means most likely that you're going to have more troubles in the Range Rover with the electronic systems, like the infotainment system. You may have more problems with some of the other electrical systems in the vehicle, like seat adjustments, that sort of thing. Dependability is almost a different question. Is your Range Rover going to break down within the first 5 years, 6 years of ownership? Is it going to leave you stranded somewhere? That's unlikely. Instead, a lot of the reliability delta between modern cars tends to be with the infotainment system and other sort of luxury car features. Now remember that if you buy a Range Rover versus a comparable Lexus, you're going to get more gadgets. And with more gadgets comes greater unreliability in a way. But what about mainstream brand to mainstream brand? The delta between something like a Dodge on the low end of the reliability scale and a comparable Toyota model at the top end of the reliability scale is going to be somewhere around an average of one problem, depending on the metric you're looking at, either one problem per year or one problem over the first 3 years of ownership. Again, it greatly depends on which metric you're looking at. That's not a huge delta really, because it's not like the Toyota on average is going to be problem-free. The Toyota on average is just going to have fewer problems. Again, a lot of those differences end up being in the infotainment system, etc. Now, the other tricky thing here with reliability metrics is that a lot of the reliability metric companies out there are asking the consumer, what do you think is a critical problem? And there's definitely a variance in critical problem descriptions. So for some reason, when we take a look at the bulk data and we really start drilling down, owners of certain brands are less likely to say that a objectively serious problem was serious to them. So, you know, I got into my car didn't start. Was it a serious problem? No, because I had another car. Or I got into my car and it didn't start and I couldn't get to work. That's a serious problem. So the way that consumers respond to these questionnaires also is a variance. And then lastly, I will also say that when you take a look at reliability metrics and you see luxury brands that are closer to the top versus mainstream brands that are further down, remember that metrics and reliability do not account for miles driven. And this is one of the key reasons that Porsche, for instance, is typically very high on the reliability list. It's not that the Porsche will have fewer problems per miles driven. It's mainly that Porsches just don't get driven. The average number of miles is significantly less on the average 911 or even the less expensive Porsche products, or actually even their modern SUVs is lower than miles driven in a Lexus, for instance. So if you're looking at this chart and you're thinking that my Porsche 911 is going to be just as reliable as my Lexus LS, the reality is no, that is not going to be the case. If you drive them the same number of miles, you're going to have more problems than that other vehicle. But when you look at the metrics, the Lexus driver drove 10,000 miles a year, the Porsche driver drove 3,000 miles a year. And this also explains some of the variation in truck-centric brands like Ram. Trucks tend to get driven more than other vehicles. So when you're looking at reliability metrics and Ram as a brand is below Dodge, the main reason for that delta is that the Ram is being driven more. And we don't see that same delta in Ford or in Chevy because they are not breaking out trucks out of those brands. Ford is jammed in there with all the rest of their vehicles. And that's part of the reason that those truck models end up being less reliable in a way. The other thing that we should address here is being careful when you're thinking about vehicle reliability to not get sucked into metrics of one, data sets that are very, very tiny. I get a lot of questions from all of you saying, how has your Dodge Durango been? Has it broken yet? And I would say no, but do not use me as a basis for reliability representations because I'm a sample size of one. Also, don't end up getting down the rabbit hole of echo chambers. So a lot of folks will ask about a specific model and they'll say, well, I went on all the forums and I see all these problems on the forums. Remember that online forums are where people go to complain. You don't see, to the same extent, people going on those forums and saying, I love my Toyota because it's so reliable. There's no love forum for the car that's reliable in that same way. So it's difficult to use those metrics. And it also goes for friends and family members that are saying, I love a car or I hate a car because of X or Y. Remember, that's also a sample of one. So with all that out of the way, let's go into one question here that actually someone just posted. T-bone steak, it boils down to short versus long-term ownership. I would say that is true as well. And remember that long-term ownership, the cost of operation also becomes a huge factor in this metric. And this is actually something that I don't know if it has ended up in a video that we have published yet, but we did discuss in some truck videos that may be coming up here, which is even if you have a product that is intrinsically less reliable, if it is less expensive to maintain and less expensive to fill up and drive, then the overall picture is going to be just less expensive. And how that affects you as a person depends on your particular desire for problem-free operation versus cost of operation, because the one is not the same as the other. And a great example of this is, again, in the truck segment. If you're looking at a Ford F-150 with the 2.7-liter turbo, which is one of the most efficient mainstream full-size trucks in America, the cost of operation over 5-10 years is going to be thousands and thousands of dollars less than a Toyota Tundra. So if you were to buy a Toyota Tundra, even with the base V8 engine, the smallest and most efficient one available, the Ford is so much more fuel efficient and less expensive to purchase initially that there is really just no way that you will ever achieve that cost delta in quote-unquote reliability. In the 10-year operational cycle, you could replace the engine and transmission at least once in that Ford, and it would still be less expensive to own. So again, your mileage will vary. So let's back up and take a look at some of your questions here. Is Android Auto worth $100? I would say, actually, I really like Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and I'm actually interested in some of your feedback on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto down there in the comment section below. I love CarPlay, but I'm wondering if I love it because I'm not in the same car every day. And I wonder how much it would affect me as a driver if I was driving that same vehicle time after time after time. I suspect that I would probably just get really used to the car's native interface for dealing with my media device, my phone, my whatever, my Bluetooth, my iPod. And I think, in a way, that I love CarPlay more, and auto journalists love CarPlay more than the public might, in a way, because I'm always in a different car. I'm driving 2, 3, 4 different cars a week. And I love the consistency of Apple CarPlay in the car. So I don't know. Let me know what you think about that down there. Let's see here. Moving along. 2018 Buick Enclave. Is it better than a Volkswagen Atlas? I would say it depends on what you're after. A lot of purchasing decisions come down to dealer network and dealer availability. Volkswagen's dealer network is not as large as Buick's, especially if you're in the middle of the U.S. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the Enclave. I like the Enclave. It's comfortable. It's big. So is the Volkswagen Atlas. The Volkswagen Atlas does better when it comes to overall child seat practicality. You can leave child seats latched into place in the second row in all 3 seating positions and still access the 3rd row. I find that more convenient than the Enclave. But there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the Buick. We do expect to see an update probably next year on the Buick. So if you're thinking about that and you don't need something right away, we'll probably see that after we see the refresh of the Acadia, which should be right around the corner here. Any info on the next Tundra? 2007 is getting long in the tooth, and I've never had an issue with it. As I've said before, when manufacturers are looking at developing new products, cost efficiency and profitability are high on their list, and the Tundra just does not sell terribly well, and that's why we don't see very many updates on that particular model. I suspect that we are not going to see a truly new Tundra anytime soon. Now, there have been rumors swirling about that, but we instead saw a recent refresh to it. So I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that it's probably going to be more than 12 calendar months away that we'll even hear any peep of that, and probably no sooner than 2 years for one actually being on dealer lots. Remember that, that even Ram, which is the smallest of the big 3, outsells Tundra by many times. And so when you take a look at that overall picture, the big 3 outsell the Toyota Tundra by 20, 30 to 1, something along those lines. And so Toyota just doesn't seem to want to spend the resources on a model that's not going to generate the kind of profit that they would like. Let's move on here. Any non-luxury auto manufacturers have traffic jam assist adaptive cruise? Yes, actually the closest and probably best that you would find to the luxury segment and the mainstream segment would be Nissan with their ProPilot Assist system. They have a very aggressive steering wheel assist feature. It works in low-speed travel, takes you all the way down to 0, and the ProPilot Assist system also has a feature to bring the vehicle to a complete stop in its lane if it thinks the driver is unresponsive. I had the opportunity to test that out in the Rogue refresh a while back up in Northern California. It does very well. It does exactly what it says on the box. If you just take your hands off the steering wheel and there's no steering input, it will do some brake pulses, it'll start beeping at you, and then it will bring itself to a complete stop in the lane of travel, turn the hazard lights on, etc. That's probably the closest. But out of that, I would say that any of the systems that takes you to a complete stop, they're going to be very similar to the luxury systems with the absence of the aggressive steering assist. Now remember that all of the active safety systems on the market, including Tesla's autopilot, are hands-on safety systems with the exception of Cadillac Super Cruise. Cadillac Super Cruise is the only one that will let you take your hands off the steering wheel and just tool down the road on a highway, stay in your lane without your hands on the wheel. All of the other systems are hands on the wheel steering assist systems. And that is one of the things that's one of the reasons that we don't do too many steering assist videos on this show. Is personally, I think that it's disingenuous for anybody else out there to do some of these Super Cruise versus Autopilot, Super Cruise versus ProPilot Assist, Super Cruise versus Volvo system or Mercedes system, etc. Because all of those other systems are hands-on-the-wheel systems. So to try and compare them to a full autonomous or any of these semi-autonomy layers where your hands are off the wheel, it is just wrong in my head because they're not hands-off. Now, Tesla is probably going to get us to the hands-off stage next, and then we can make more appropriate comparisons between that system and Cadillac Super Cruise. But I would say that up until the point where the hands have become off the wheel, it's a little unfair to make some of those comparisons. Let's see here. Toyota has 0 mile bars, not stop and go. Okay, there we go. Tooling down the list here. When will the 2020 Buick Encore be revealed? I'm actually not sure, but I'm excited about that one because I've always loved the Encore. It's a great little crossover, and I'm hoping that maybe it will get an update sooner rather than later. We just haven't heard too much about it yet. Tooling along here. Let's see here. We'll be reviewing the Jetta Gli. We will be reviewing it, but I'm not sure if we are going to be invited to the launch event. We've reached out to Volkswagen and asked about that. We haven't heard back yet. So let's see here. Next question. How do summer tires improve handling? Or how much do summer tires improve handling? They improve handling a huge amount. So this is something that I've said before, but we haven't touched, too much on. But tires are one of the single biggest things you can do to affect handling on a new car in a positive direction and in a negative direction. So if you go out and you buy a lightly loved BMW M3 and you're thinking this is great, it's fantastic, I bought an M3, I can finally afford one, and then you go to replace your summer tires after 5,000 miles and you realize that summer tires are expensive and you say, well, forget that, I'm just going to get some cheapo tires from Costco, I'm just going to go $100 per wheel, 50,000 mile warranty, that's where I want to be. You're going to have a very different experience in that M3 than if you replaced it with the same tires that it came with. Likewise, if you buy a very eco-focused vehicle, for instance, if you were to buy an electric car or a hybrid or something along those lines, and you were to put summer tires on it, you're going to get absolutely excellent handling out of the vehicle 9 times out of 10. Because the modern crop of hybrids actually tends to have relatively good suspension designs. The Toyota Prius, for instance, actually has a very well-sorted front and rear suspension. The weight balance isn't too bad, but the tires are narrow and they're not very grippy. So you put wider tires, grippier tires on that, it's going to outhandle any of the other compact vehicles as equipped in Toyota's lineup. So hopefully that helps out that question there. Any hope of getting the Dodge Ram infotainment into a new Jeep Grand Cherokee or updated Durango? I would say no. Remember that mainstream car companies like Ram, Chrysler, FCA, Toyota, Honda, etc., the infotainment system that starts in a generation generally seems to die in that model as well. The only modern company that seems to go away from that model is Mazda, where they will update the infotainment system a little bit more frequently and keep them more consistent, I should say. Luxury car companies tend to be a little bit different. And it seems to be the modularity within the design of the vehicle and the infotainment system. Mainstream vehicles tend to be highly integrated with the screen that's in the dash. So when Honda or Chrysler or Toyota creates a new vehicle and integrates that entire system in there for reliability and a number of other reasons, that's just designed to continue until the vehicle gets a major refresh. So Uconnect has been updated software versions over versions within that same hardware, but it's unlikely that we'll see a whole new hardware version jammed into the car until they've had the chance to do a more major refresh to the car. So expect it in more FCA vehicles in the future, but don't expect it to come just mid-year or on a simple model year changeover. It's going to have to be tied in with a more thorough refresh and update. Let's see here. Is there going to be a Jeep Grand Wagoneer? I sure hope so. We do know that Jeep is going to be preparing a boatload of new crossovers. We don't know exactly what they will all be, but we do expect to see a lot of crossovers coming up from FCA very soon. Let's see here. I don't see a big gap in reliability between Toyota and Korean. There used to be a big difference 10 to 15 years ago, not anymore. That's definitely true. We have seen huge strides from Hyundai and from Kia in terms of overall reliability. And Hyundai and Kia are definitely taking on a lot of what we saw Honda and Toyota innovate in the 70s and 80s in order to improve their overall reliability, and they're really taking it to heart. So in modern cars that you're going to buy right now in 2019, there probably is not going to be a statistical difference in reliability between mainstream Toyota models, mainstream Hyundai models, and mainstream Kia models. They're all going to actually be quite even. And I think a lot of that has to do with their engineering ethos. All three of those companies, or two of those companies, depending on how you want to look at the Hyundai-Kia conglomerate, tend to really be focused on engineering and baking in that reliability from the beginning in their models. They tend to be much more conservative companies when it comes to engineering than other companies out there. For instance, you will never see Toyota really being cutting edge in a lot of ways. Toyota tends to prefer tried and true reliability methods. They tend to like high degrees of commonality in parts. They tend to like evolving things over time, and they tend to like engineering concepts that have been very well thought out and very well proven in order to integrate them into the vehicle and ensure that reliability is going to be high. That's why we don't see very many turbocharged engines from Toyota, for instance. They prefer naturally aspirated engines. We also don't see, until very recently, we didn't see very many continuously variable transmissions from Toyota. We didn't see very many 8-speed automatics. They're the captive transmission company, which is mainly owned by Toyota, Aisin. They developed a new 8-speed automatic transmission. They used it in one Lexus model for a while. Then they let Volvo and Volkswagen and other companies buy the transmission. And then they took feedback and figured out what was going wrong, etc. And now we see the 8-speed in more Toyota models. We see a relatively similar mantra over at Hyundai and Kia in terms of reliability. And I think that's the big difference when it comes to overt reliability metrics between certain brand sets. Going along here, when is the new Toyota Highlander going to be revealed? I suspect it's going to be relatively soon. The Highlander is definitely one of the older vehicles that's not yet on that platform, and it's definitely going to be the next in Toyota's sights. So hopefully, probably hopefully we might see something in November, although we don't really know for sure yet. Let's go down here. I bought a Stelvio TI and was wondering if I could buy a spare besides dealer rim and tire. Your best bet is going to be to buy a spare that was designed for that vehicle. So that's going to be the one that's going to be the easiest to integrate with any possible attachment points that might be existing in the vehicle. And it's also probably going to be the one that is going to be best rated for the car. Remember that spare tires are not rated to be driven on all the time, and they have very specific load characteristics, and the rims are designed to fit around brakes very specifically. So if a tire is available for your vehicle, that's the one I would go with. If you're really looking for a durable spare, something that you can drive on longer, then you're going to want to buy a wheel that matches your set and put a real tire on it. Moving along here. Is it just me, or is the sound gone again? Our sound level meters say that the sound is here, but again, we may have some buffering issues, so I do apologize for that in advance. Someone is asking if the new Tesla Model 3 will sell well at $35,000. I'm thinking they're going to sell as many as they can make. And that's basically what we've actually seen from the Model 3 at the higher price points, is that Tesla just cannot make Model 3s fast enough. I think that everybody has been impressed by Tesla's sales numbers there. They have been outselling the BMW 3 Series in the luxury segment at luxury price points, and they've been outselling everybody, I believe, but Mercedes in that group as well. So definitely a very, very high-selling vehicle. I don't know if any of you are watching right now are following us on Facebook, but I have actually put a deposit down and ordered a Tesla Model 3, the $35,000 base model, which I'm calling the Meghan Trainor Edition, because it's all about that base. Fabric seats and everything. The only option that I did select was the blue paint job, because I think in reality most people will opt for one of the colors other than black. But base tires, cloth seats, the whole works, so we'll see how that goes. We're probably going to keep it for a few months and then sell it on, as we plan to do with the Toyota RAV4 that should be coming up soon. So we're going to treat it just like any other short-term vehicle here. I'm very excited to see how that turns out, because it is going to be easily the most compelling electric vehicle actually in the US right now. I know that some of you have thought that I am anti-Tesla, but I think the best way to describe my feelings overall for Tesla would be to separate the business side, which I think is crazy run, from the vehicles themselves, which I actually don't ever have a problem with. Now, Tesla's obviously had some quality issues, some reliability issues, but I would then go back to the metrics and ask about true quality versus build quality. Build quality on the Model 3 has not been good. Paint issues, fitment issues, all that kind of stuff. Everybody knows about that. Actual getting in your car, driving it to work, really haven't heard any problems with the Model 3. And those are the kind of problems that are unlikely to crop up long term, because we do have a track record in the Model S and the Model X. The electronic systems, the motors, the battery packs themselves, that's all very proven technology. So the other extraneous bits, yes, that's something that could go wrong in the future. I mean, your paint could get really bad after a few years because of some of the paint issues they're working through. Your body panels aren't going to magically fit themselves together any better than they were before. But as far as true intrinsic reliability and dependability, I don't necessarily see a problem. And I'm eager to see what the $35,000 base model is going to be like. Now, with that said, I will remind you that Tesla's tax credit, because of their sales success, is sunsetting in the United States. So it has already been cut in half. If you buy one right now, you will only get half of that $7,500 tax credit. And if you buy one after the second half of the year, it will get cut in half again. And if you are waiting until 2020 to buy one, you won't get a federal tax credit at all. I would also remind you that in some locales and some states, the local tax credit is being means tested. So if you are a high income earner, you may not be able to get all of that credit either. That said, however, $35,000 is definitely within the price range of many EVs in America. And we only recently learned the final price tag of the only true competitor to the Model 3 in the US at the moment, the new Nissan Leaf Plus, formerly known as the E Plus. Kind of silly name, so they dropped the E and now it's just the Leaf Plus. The Leaf Plus will start at $36,000. Now, the Leaf will qualify for the full federal tax credit of $7,500. However, if you get the Leaf Plus with all of the options, the top end trim, that's about $42,000. So even though it gets a bigger tax credit than the Model 3, by the time you factored that in and you factored the Model 3's half tax credit in, they're only about $1,000 apart or so. And that goes also for something like the Hyundai Kona EV in limited form. It's going to be about $1,000 more than the Tesla. Now, you're going to get some things in that Kona that you won't get in the Model 3. You are going to get leather, you're going to get the sunroof, you're going to get power seats, you're going to get adaptive cruise control, which you don't get in the base Tesla. You get some of the automated safety stuff, but not adaptive cruise control. But the Tesla is going to be faster 0 to 60, it's going to be rear-wheel drive, it's going to have higher efficiency overall, and it's going to have slightly faster charging both on AC and on DC. So there's a logical reason to upgrade for that low price that we see in the Model 3. There's a logical reason to go for that over some of those other options if you're interested in those features. Now, it is worth noting that the trunk in the Model 3 is a little on the small side because it's a much smaller car than the Model S. So 15 cubic feet versus some of the larger cargo areas we see in other alternatives. But with that out of the way, let's continue moving along here. Moving to Pasadena from the East Coast, any thoughts on the new Audi e-tron? I would actually say that the e-tron falls into the same category as the Jaguar I-Pace does for me. And my main thoughts there are, I love the way that it looks. I love that a mainstream luxury brand is getting in the EV market. If you want traditional luxury car values of the luxury car dealer experience, the predictable experience of dealing with an established brand, not a newcomer brand that's trying to do things differently. But if you like that traditional experience, if you like the traditional brand, etc., and everything that goes along with that, the predictability, the lack of surprises, etc., then it's going to be a good option. But that said, the two key things that I have a problem with when it comes to the e-tron and the I-Pace are identical, and that is overall efficiency, the speed at which they gain range, and the charging in those vehicles. And they're all tied together. So when we're talking about efficiency in electric vehicles, it's the same as gasoline. How far can you get on the amount of energy that you've got on board? And that's where Tesla does very, very, very well. The Model X, for instance, even though the Model X is a whale, I mean, it's huge, it's heavy, it's 1,000 pounds heavier than a Jaguar I-Pace, but somehow it is 30% more efficient than the Jaguar, and that's a big, big deal. That means that for X number of kilowatts, you can go further in your Model X, or your Model S, or your Model 3, because all of them are more efficient than the I-Pace. Then when we couple that with the slower charging rates that we see on the AC charge connector, plugging in for an hour is going to get you not only more miles because it's more efficient in the Tesla versus the Jaguar, but the Tesla's onboard charger is also faster than the I-Pace. And if you get a Model S or Model X, then it's even faster than the Model 3. So those are my big points on the Jaguar and the Audi, is that I'm disappointed that those manufacturers didn't spend a little bit more time on efficiency and that they didn't go with the faster onboard charger. Now, the next major competitor I think coming up soon is going to be the Polestar 2. And the Polestar 2 is going to be kind of an interesting twist because efficiency still appears to be behind Tesla, although it is closer. But Volvo, nay Polestar, has now really sort of worked on the charging, and they've gotten the charging as fast as we see in the Model 3 on AC. And so that's really going to help out there. But we'll know more when those come on the market. Rick is asking, will Tesla be in business in 18 months? I don't honestly think that's a problem. Now, what will Tesla look like in 18 months on the business side? That is a different question. And that's where, when we look at their financials, we have to say their path to profitability has to be to try and lower costs, which they're doing now by cutting all the showrooms in the US practically off, trying to go direct, or gaining more revenue in. And I actually think that Tesla's path to revenue is probably going to be better suited towards more expensive models, personally, like the Roadster. I'm very interested to see what that does for them, because the Roadster could be intrinsically more profitable because it's a more expensive vehicle. I also personally would hope that Tesla redesigns the Model S and gets some sales momentum behind that, because a mild refresh or a mild redesign of the Model S could help bring in more cash as well. But even if everything went wrong, Tesla would be fine because someone would buy them and continue the movement there. Tesla has reached a point where they're not just going to fade into the woods. If we're worried about vaporware, I would be more worried about companies like Byington, Rivian, other manufacturers like that that haven't shipped anything. Because of Tesla's history and their shipments, I'm really not worried on that front. Matt is asking, when will we do a full review of the Honda Passport? Looking to see my thoughts on that in the 9-speed. We will have the Passport in for a full review. I'm not sure when, but if you don't like the way that ZF 9-speed shifts, don't buy the Passport, because the transmission is basically the same as before. Now, there have been some minor tweaks to it. Most of them are software tweaks, not hardware tweaks. And remember that the core reason that the ZF 9-speed shifts the way that it does is due to the physical design of the transmission. So there's no software on the world that is ever going to make it shift like Honda's 6-speed or like Honda's 10-speed automatic transmission. So if you don't like the way that shifts, then just don't buy the Passport. I would say move up into something like an Acura RDX would be a very good alternative to the Passport. It uses Honda's new 10-speed, which is a gorgeous transmission. I love the way that shifts. I actually wish that Honda would sell their 10-speed to companies out there that are using ZF's 9-speed. Probably not going to happen, but the Honda 10-speed is a great one. Moving along here. Hyundai Palisade or Kia Telluride? That is a tricky question. I like the way the Telluride looks on the outside more than the Palisade, but I like the way the Palisade looks on the inside more than the Telluride. We will be driving the Telluride in 3 weeks, so be sure and stay tuned for that video there. What's the best trim of the Hyundai Accent for modifying or rally stunt jumping? That's an interesting question that I hadn't considered. I don't know. I would say probably a Veloster instead. How can highway safety make manufacturers get away with no spare? Spare tires are something that I don't understand their removal in modern cars, to be perfectly frank. I love a spare tire. I use spare tires all the time. Every vehicle that I have owned, probably once a year, is in need of a spare tire. And I do have to say that that is a big annoying thing with our Kia Soul EV, is that there's no spare tire, and then there was nowhere to put a spare tire because the spare tire well was occupied by the blower to cool the battery pack. And for some reason, they couldn't stick that blower somewhere else. And that is a pain in the butt, because we've had to pull the tire off, leave it on a jack stand, take the tire somewhere to get it fixed. Pain in the butt. But the big reason is fuel economy and overall weight. Remember that fuel economy is the reason that manufacturers do all sorts of things in the US. It's the reason that we don't see any big sedans. It's the reason that we see, strangely, big trucks and big SUVs, because they're in different categories. So fuel economy and fuel economy regulations drive automotive design like you wouldn't believe. And the spare tire is excess weight that they can get away with. They can get away with removing. Also remember that although maybe you and I like spare tires and we're willing to stop and put on our own spare tire, that doesn't describe the majority of the automotive public. And a lot of folks out there don't know how to do it, don't want to deal with it, and would rather just have someone else handle the entire problem for them. So in light of that, that's why they're missing from vehicles. But I am really happy with companies that if they do remove the spare tire, that they at least allow the space for you to put it back in if you want to. And that's one of the reasons that I always go over the spare tire in any vehicle that we review. Let's see here. Does the Tesla supercharging network make the difference between battery electric vehicle manufacturers? Here's my thought on the Tesla supercharging network, and some people have argued with me on this one, but I think the numbers are in my benefit here. The innovation with Tesla's supercharging network is not the speed, because it's not the fastest available. It's not the number of charging ports, because actually Chatham O outnumbers total number of ports installed. Chatham O outnumbers supercharger. SAE Fast Charge supposedly will by the end of this year. The innovation with the supercharging network is location, location, location. And this makes sense actually, because when you look at the modern crop of Teslas, their battery packs are large enough that you aren't going to be supercharging as often as a Leaf or the competition. So the number of charge ports doesn't need to be there necessarily. The location is more important here. Also, the supercharger networks are lighter on the ground in metro areas, especially in California. So if we look at the greater Bay Area, there are far more charge ports for Chatham O and SAE than for the Tesla supercharging network. But again, it's the mission of the supercharger. The supercharger network was designed to facilitate long distance travel. And that's why we see superchargers in places where there frankly aren't very many Teslas. You'll see superchargers in Montana, you'll see superchargers in Nebraska and Colorado, and across the South. The big difference in owning an E-Tron or an I-Pace or a Kona EV or a Niro, any of these other longer range EVs that are coming on the market that don't use this Tesla network, the big experience difference in them would be that longer range travel. So for instance, if you lived in New York and you wanted to go to Seattle, or lived in Seattle and wanted to go to New York, you could take the most direct interstate route across the top of the US in a Tesla, but you could not do that in a Jaguar or an Audi, etc., because there are no SAE fast charge connectors on that northern route across the US, but Tesla has installed them to facilitate that kind of travel. Now, if you wanted to cross the US in your Jag, you could do that, but you would have to drop all the way down through Salt Lake City into Colorado and then tootle along I-80 that way and then pop back up into New York on the other side, because that's where you'll find those fast charge connectors. Because no manufacturer yet has decided to really put fast charge connectors in states that make no fiscal sense in their own right, that's why we're not seeing them in Montana and some of those other locations. Tesla is quite logically probably losing lots of money on the supercharger network across those less traveled areas, those low population density areas, low EV population areas, but they're there to facilitate that kind of travel, and that's what's unique about the supercharger network. Moving along here, how is the Alfa Stelvio and why can't it get CarPlay? Again, this has to do with the overall design of the infotainment system. It's pretty common for infotainment systems to be designed with a specific set of features and not be upgradable, because that additional upgradable functionality helps breed some unreliability possible in the system. And frankly, we just don't see that kind of upgradability in many vehicles. Now, some of the FCA vehicles with Uconnect was able to upgrade to CarPlay after the fact. The Mazda set of vehicles was able to upgrade. And some of the Hyundai Kia vehicles, due to their overall design, were able to be upgraded. But a lot of systems out there just simply weren't designed with that kind of interface in mind from the very beginning. Moving along here, we have someone torn between a Volkswagen Tiguan and, oops, pardon me here. The YouTube chat window is not very well designed here, I have to say. Volkswagen Tiguan and, sorry about that, that is just sort of lost there into the YouTube window, I think. Let's move along to a different question here. RDX or Passport have a preference? I would say RDX, it's just a great value, and the Passport is a little pricey in that segment, so they do end up getting somewhat similar there. Someone's asking, will the 2020 Corolla be any different for rental fleets, such as not adding TSS to sell it cheaper? We don't know exactly, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a fleet version for some of Toyota's vehicles to delete the Safety Sense package there to make them less expensive. Any news of Lexus making a V8 option for the LS? There have been consistent rumors about a V8 returning in the Lexus LS flagship, and it does appear that there's enough room in the engine compartment for it, but Lexus is pretty tight-lipped on their future product plans, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's not going to happen in the near future. I suspect something more likely would be a more powerful hybrid, perhaps, in the future for the LS. But we don't really know yet. So let's see here. Someone's torn between a Giulia TI and a G70 fully loaded. What would I buy? That is a tricky one. I would probably get the G70. As much as I love the Giulia, I would worry a little bit about some of the problems that people have had, and I just love the G70. I'm assuming you're talking about the 3.3-liter turbo. That is going to be the sportier option. But if you want to get a really great lease deal, or if you're simply looking at the lower priced options, then the Giulia is going to be a good buy. Heard that Volkswagen's reliability on some models is spotty. Any insight? Yes, Volkswagen has had some tumbles with reliability. Again, separating reliability and dependability is tricky. Remember that Volkswagen uses Aisin transmissions, so they're the same transmissions for the automatic transmission models that you'll find on Toyota vehicles. So on that front, as far as dependability getting you somewhere, I'm not really too worried about them. They haven't really had many engine issues either. A lot of Volkswagen's issues seem to be circling around some body panel reliability, you know, things not fitting quite right or squeaking or whatever, and then some electronics issues. Someone's asking if diesels will come back to the US. It's unlikely in this climate. Volkswagen Golf or Mazda 3. I think at the moment for the current versions, I would Volkswagen Golf, but then we're going to be driving the new Mazda 3 soon, and I suspect the Mazda 3 will probably beat that. However, we might see a refresh to the Golf here shortly, so we'll keep that in mind here. Let's see here, moving along here, can't live without Android Auto. Alpha has $13,000 off MSRP. That's a good point. Alpha does have a lot of cash on the hood, so the deal is definitely important. Which car is better in terms of tech and reliability? A 2019 XC40, the Acura RDX, or a CPO 2018 Audi A5 Prestige? Tech and reliability, both. The RDX is probably going to be the more reliable vehicle here. Generally speaking, Acura's reliability beats Audi and Volvo as well. The XC40 has been seemingly okay. It is the first vehicle on its smaller car platform, but because it's borrowing all of its drivetrain bits from other Volvo models, I don't see any drivetrain issues really in the XC40's future. Generally speaking, Volvo's reliability has been a little bit lower than the average for the European set, but I would say that it pays off in terms of its overall driving and handling nature, and I like the way the interior and exterior are styled just a little bit more than the RDX. Now, the RDX is going to be roomier, so I would say I would be pretty torn also between the XC40 and the RDX. It would depend on how much you value the style versus the room, etc. But I would choose either of those over the CPO Audi personally. Hey everyone, has Alex mentioned the $35,000 Tesla Model 3? I think we did cover that, so hopefully you've already heard that. You might be able to go back on this video. EV car adoption, again, I think just depends on what kind of volume Tesla can crank out. The big question would be, at $35,000, with Tesla's business model, can they crank out 100,000 Model 3s a year, 200,000 Model 3s a year, with the same kind of quality that we see in other mainstream vehicles? I think the one tricky thing with Tesla would be when, and this is definitely a Model 3 thing, when we have traditional Camry and Accord shoppers that are looking at that as a viable alternative, because the price tag is definitely within a similar range. You could give up some of the room that you'd find in a Camry and some of the feature set you'd find in a Camry for that $35,000 Model 3 model. That's definitely within the right range. Is this customer going to be accepting of some of the eccentricities, shall we say, that are inherent in the Tesla ownership experience? And we just don't know quite yet whether that will happen or not. I suspect that a large number of folks will be interested to try at least, and then it becomes just a production volume thing. The factory in Fremont, where GM and Toyota were making vehicles there before, definitely has a capacity higher than Tesla is utilizing right now. So if somehow Tesla can get that production up in a reliable fashion, then I'm sure they'll be just fine. Let's see here. Sorry if someone answered this one. Why did we get rid of our clickable annotation section on the side of the videos? That is a really good question. Sadly, YouTube killed it for us. So there was a feature within YouTube videos called annotations, and that was where you could click on little areas there and it could jump you to certain things, jump you forward or backward in the video. And for some reason, YouTube killed it. I believe it was because they were too lazy, frankly, to update that for use on mobile phones. It could have been that mobile phone screens were just too small for this to try and click those little buttons there. Any way you slice it, it never worked on mobile devices. It only worked on other sort of YouTube devices, and they just killed it. So we all had to deal with it. Here we go. Can't buy the 2020 Shelby GT500 if Ford does not send you an invitation. Check out the speed. He went to order one, is told no. I have heard that, so that is interesting, but I would also say that if it does well, you will likely be able to buy one later, and that's something that we don't know exact details on because Ford keeps things close to their chest, but I wouldn't be surprised if you waited a few years to perhaps even 1 year if it was a little bit more available there. Someone's asking, is there a Sienna hybrid coming to the US? It does not appear that there will be one anytime soon. Genesis dealerships in California, any updates? No, we haven't heard any updates yet on Genesis dealers. There are still drama swirling around the franchise agreements, so hopefully that will be better there. Justin is asking, how does Cadillac get away with hands-off driving in Super Cruise? There are several reasons Cadillac gets away with that. The biggest and most important one is that they're doing driver monitoring. So the reason that in all the other driver assistance systems out there you have to have your hands on the wheel is so that the manufacturer of the vehicle knows that there is a warm body in the driver's seat and the driver's seat is somewhat engaged in the driving process, because the systems, none of the systems are designed to be fully autonomous yet. They're not designed to handle the mattress in the road or the chair or the whatever, any of those emergency situations. So what Cadillac does is they're eye monitoring. So they're making sure that the driver, even if your hands are not on the wheel, is actually looking straight forward. And that's how they get away with the hands not on the wheel. I would say that based on what we've seen from Autopilot's performance in modern Teslas, that if they simply added a driver monitoring system to the Model 3, Model S, Model X, etc., it would be able to perform just like Super Cruise in that respect with the hands-off ability, but Tesla hasn't gone there yet, so for whatever reason. Plug-in hybrid RAV4 plans. Toyota does not seem to be too interested in plug-in hybrids for a variety of different reasons, but it doesn't appear that there's a plug-in hybrid RAV4 in store. We haven't really seen anything. Let's see here. Alfa Romeo Stelvio, person can't buy a spare tire, aftermarket, why? I think we covered that one already, hopefully. What do we think about the WLTP emission and fuel economy tests in the EU? That is a good question that I do not know too much about, actually. So I am not fully versed in the EU European fuel economy tests. I do know that they're very different than ours here. But I am in the US and we deal with American market cars here, so generally I just talk about EPA tests. So sorry about that one. Any thoughts on the Polestar 2 by Volvo, a true Model 3 beater? I think there are two big questions with the Polestar 2 while we're on the EV subject here in this video. First one would be overall efficiency. By the numbers, by the range and the size of the battery, it would appear that the Model 3 is going to be more efficient than the Volvo. And as I said earlier, that's a big thing in my book because you're going to gain range faster and your battery is going to be able to take you longer. Other than that, actually, the Polestar 2 appears to be a really interesting twist on this segment because they're not doing a skateboard battery like everybody else, where the battery is all in one thin pizza box thing underneath the car. It's built-in modules around a more traditional tunnel design in the vehicle. So I'm really intrigued to see how that ends up in person and whether or not we have a frunk in the Polestar 2, because I don't think we've heard that quite yet. Pricing's the other one. We only know the launch edition pricing, which after the federal tax credit is actually quite competitive with the Model 3. If you look at it without the tax credit, then the Polestar seems kind of expensive because it's right on the heels of the Model 3 Performance. But remember, by the time the Polestar comes out, there will be no tax credit on any of the Teslas, and the Volvo will still get the full $7,500. So that's going to be a big difference there. How expensive do we think the XT6 will be? I'm afraid that it will be near $80,000. I actually agree with you there on the top end. I think that it's going to be about $80,000. And the reason here is that when we look at the XT4 and the XT5, they're quite expensive in their segments. The XT5 can get up to about $70,000. So it would be quite logical that the XT6 would land between the XT5 and the Escalade. So definitely my estimate would be somewhere in the high 50s to low 60s as far as the starting price goes, and then going on up into that $80,000 price point seems very rational to me for the XT6. And I believe that the Aviator will be similarly priced. So I'm personally much more excited about the Aviator. I've actually said this before in other videos. Just generally, I'm excited about the Aviator because this is the first true X5 competitor from the US, it appears. The X5 is obviously rear-wheel drive. We have those high horsepower options, excellent performance across the X5 lineup. And now we'll have an Aviator, which is rear-wheel drive and starts at 400 horsepower with a 10-speed automatic transmission. So this is really an interesting twist. And the interior is just very, very well done. Same thing that we saw in the Navigator. Lincoln has really turned over a new leaf there. It makes the Lincoln Continental feel somewhat left behind and dowdy, to be honest. So we'll see how that ends up there. Patrick is asking about the 25-year import rule. I've always been sad by the 25-year import rule because there's so many cool cars that it would be fun to import. But I sort of understand why it's there. It's to prevent gray market imports from becoming a big thing in the US like we do see in other countries. But I kind of wish it was a little shorter, maybe 15 years, something along those lines. What do we think of the Mazda 6? The Mazda 6 is terribly pretty. Road noise was a little high for us. I argued a lot with Mazda about that, actually, in our video. They had a lot of feedback. It's one of the few videos that I've received multiple contacts from a manufacturer on. But I stand by our road noise tests. The big thing with the Mazda 6 was wheel and tire noise on the ground. Remember that when we're talking about cabin noise, there are two big components. There's wind noise, and then there's tire noise. So if you're on a really rough road surface, tire noise is going to be the biggest impact overall. And if you're on a really smooth, quiet road surface, then you're going to really be hearing that wind noise in the cabin. The Mazda does very, very well when it comes to wind noise, but when it came to road noise, the tire and sound deadening combinations in that cabin did make it a little bit louder than the Accord or the Camry. The Mazda 6 is also a little bit smaller on the inside, and it is also a little bit older feeling than either of those options, but it's very, very pretty, and the handling feel is excellent. So solid reasons to buy the Mazda 6. I wouldn't say it's my top pick, but you absolutely couldn't go wrong with getting one. Let's see here. Is buying a Tesla worth it for a person living in an apartment? Is it practical? I suppose that would depend on your charging situation. The battery pack is definitely big, so even in the short range version. So if you have the ability to charge at work, then it's not really going to be a huge deal. And if for some reason you didn't really have a problem visiting the supercharger station a lot, you could do that as well, as long as that was somewhat convenient to you. I know a few people that always charge their Tesla that way. Personally, it seems a little bit odd to go and spend half hour every week at a charging station when you could just plug it in at home. But if you live in an apartment, you don't have too much choice. You could always lobby your apartment complex to try and get them to install charging stations, of course. Waterloo or LaCroix. This is Waterloo. Let's see here. Do we think Sweden wants to ban all combustion engines by 2030? Do you think this will continue? I'm not sure that Sweden would get there, to be perfectly honest. It's a nice thought, but I don't think that's really practical for all intents and purposes. EVs make great vehicles for some use cases, but they're not the right solution for all use cases at the moment that we see. Let's see here. Is the Audi Q3 coming to the US? Yes, the Q3 is coming to the US. Moving along here. K900 better than E-Class? That is a tricky question. I like the K900 and I like the E-Class. As far as quality goes, the two vehicles are very, very comparable. The K900 it has exceptional build quality. It has exceptional reliability metrics as well, and a decent feature set. It also is definitely a little bit larger and more comfortable on the inside than the E-Class. But I think that the E-Class is a little bit more luxurious in terms of its overall style. The other thing to remember is that the E-Class offers a lot more personalization. So you can have more colors are available, more combinations of colors, more features and options and gadgets and gizmos are available in the E-Class. But you'll pay for all of that because the E-Class will be more expensive. And of course, the Kia is going to have a Kia logo on the front. The Mercedes is going to have a Mercedes logo on the front. So you have to ask yourself how much the logo is worth to you specifically. Someone's asking, should I get an Odyssey or a Pilot? I don't need to carry 6 people, although I carry quite a bit of stuff in tow from time to time, which would be more practical. Towing is going to be fairly similar between the two. If you're towing larger weights, then I would suggest finding a vehicle, pardon me, that has towing more in mind. That's one of the reasons that I ended up with the Durango rather than anything else in that category. It simply tows better. Ooh, pardon me. The Odyssey in top-end trims does have the option of the 10-speed automatic transmission, which I prefer over the 9-speed, and you're going to get more cargo room in the back, but the cargo room is oddly not practical in those top-end trims versus something like a Chrysler Pacifica. So I would say maybe shop around a little bit more, explore your other options depending on your exact cargo and towing needs. Moving along here. We have Buick Tour X or Subaru Outback. I would Tour X at the moment, but remember that the new Subaru Outback is coming right around the corner, and it's going to have probably an optional turbocharged engine, so that should be pretty cool. Nissan Titan getting a refresh soon. It doesn't seem to be likely because the Titan sales haven't been where Nissan has wanted them to be, and Nissan has really cut back on some of their spending lately because it got a little out of control a few years ago, and it doesn't seem like we're going to see too much movement right there on the Titan. Why is it hard to compare top-end mainstream brands to entry-level luxury brands? For instance, Telluride to MDX. If you had to choose, do you prefer an engine that's more horsepower, more torque? Ooh, several questions there. The main difficulty in comparing mainstream brands to luxury brands is that the average shopper isn't doing that. So when I'm trying to create a video for all of you that are out there watching, the majority of folks out there watching a video on a Pilot are interested in how the Pilot compares to the Highlander and the CX-9 and the Explorer, etc., rather than how the Pilot compares to the MDX. Now, obviously there are going to be some shoppers that are doing these comparisons. It's not totally crazy to think that someone couldn't cross-shop these, or couldn't cross-shop totally different vehicles. So someone out there may be saying, I'm looking at a Mercedes-Benz C-Class and an Acura MDX and a BMW Z4. That's a plausible combination of competitors, but it's difficult to fit into a video, and the videos would get really long if we tried to do that. Big differences, generally speaking, between mainstream brands and luxury brands would be in the kind of features that are available. Obviously, the brand on the hood is going to be bigger, or a big difference right there, and of value to some people. But also, when we start comparing some things like a CX-9 or a CX-5 to an MDX or a Volvo, in those categories, maybe the Volvo is the better example here. So you'll see two-way lumbar support in the CX-9. You'll see four-way lumbar support and seat massage in the XC90. You'll see soft touch after-stitched dashes in the CX-9. You'll see a true leather dash in the Volvo. You'll see real wood trim in the CX-9, but you'll see wood options in the luxury set, that sort of thing. You'll also see generally more power, better performance, different styles of engines, transmissions, suspension combinations, etc., available or standard. Now, unquestionably, the value is going to be better in the mainstream brand that is trying to punch above their weight as far as features for the dollar, but then overall feature count is going to be better in the luxury vehicle. Hopefully that makes sense there. Prefer an engine that has more horsepower or more torque. I would say that ends up being a question of what you're after. So if you're doing a lot of towing or hill climbing, then torque. If you're not, then horsepower is arguably a little bit more important, but the two are linked because of the way that they're calculated. So you aren't really going to get an engine in a modern vehicle that's 1,000 horsepower and 100 pound-feet of torque. That's the way that they're calculated. That's never going to happen. There's always going to be some relationship there, but as we see in, for instance, the Ram 3500 with 1,000 pound-feet of torque, we're still seeing 0 to 60 times up there at around 10 seconds. But if you took the 1,000 horsepower nearly engine out of a Dodge Demon and jammed it under the hood of a Ram 3500, even though it didn't have 1,000 pound-feet of torque, but instead had nearly 1,000 horsepower, it would definitely get you 0 to 60 faster, if that makes sense. Why did the 2019 Ram Laramie, why not get the 2019 Ram Laramie with the new barn doors? I'm not sure what that is in reference to. Scooting along here, expectations for Telluride and Palisade. I'm sure they're going to sell very well. Someone's asking if I am a mechanical engineer. I am not, but mechanical things have always interested me, and I have a lot of engineers in my family. Let's see here. Would modifying the wheel size on a new car void the warranty of the car? Generally speaking, no. Now, unless modifying the wheel size was directly linked to some other problem. So say you got wheels with a really weird offset and they were hanging way out of the car, and then you started having problems with the wheel bearings, then they're not going to warrant the wheel bearing. But they're not going to void the warranty on the car just because of the wheel. There's been a lot of debate on this, but there are laws in the US that say that aftermarket parts, just by their nature of being aftermarket parts, cannot invalidate a factory warranty. But if what you have done aftermarket, it can be linked to a problem, then that particular problem may not be covered. So tootling along here, when are we doing a complete review of the Lexus UX? That is actually coming out on Monday. So the UX, we have the UX Hybrid. It was raining and hailing during that review, so if you want to see me get wet, that is a video that you should watch. Corolla IM or the new hatchback. I would definitely get the new hatchback. I actually like the hatchback a little bit more than the sedan. Camry SE versus Regal GS. That's an interesting one. I like the Regal GS overall. It definitely feels a little bit more premium than the Camry. It's not quite as roomy in the back seat though versus the Camry, but you'll probably get a better deal actually on the Buick, let me say that, than the Camry. So they're probably about the same price. Let's see, so we'll have a Tesla next week. Probably not next week. They're saying 2 to 4 weeks. I'm gonna go ahead and bet that it's gonna be more on the 4 to 6 week era. Of course, we will see. Let's see here. RAV6 Camry engine. Oh, no. So from what we've seen from Toyota, they're not interested in putting a V6 back in the RAV4. They say the take rate was low, and the new RAV4 supposedly was not designed with the V6 in mind. So that's how that's going to be. Who has the best CVT, Forte or Corolla? I like the one in the Forte better. The one in the Forte and the one in the newest Honda vehicles are probably the best CVTs on the market right now. Let's see here. Thoughts on the Buick Inspire concept coming to production. I will believe that when I see it. We haven't really reviewed the 6-speed automatic transmission. Is it a reliable V6 engine? We have reviewed the 6-speed transmission, but not quite so directly. I've driven it at other events, and we've had it before for short times, but we haven't done a full review specifically on it. The models that have been featured in our reviews have been the higher end trims, so we could show you the features that are available and talk about whether they're worth it or not. But trust me, I have definitely driven the 6-speed. When did Kia switch to a CVT? The latest Forte and the new Soul are now CVT vehicles, and you should expect more CVTs in the future as we approach some CAFE targets in terms of the federal fuel economy standards. So that's why we also see them from Toyota. Expect to see more Toyota products with CVTs as well. Blah, blah. Toyota has best CVT with dedicated launch gear. The Toyota CVT with the dedicated launch gear does help initial acceleration because it lowers the effective drive ratio from that initial launch. But the trouble with the Toyota CVT is it doesn't change ratios as fast as the Honda or the Kia Hyundai CVT. And that would be more useful in passing maneuvers or accelerating on the highway, that sort of thing. In a traditional CVT, or an older CVT design, I should say, like the Nissan CVTs, the ones that are made by Jatco, that other manufacturers have used as well, when you step on the accelerator pedal, if you're going 50, 55 miles an hour, the transmission shifts ratios relatively glacially, and you'll get this, you get initial acceleration because you've stepped on the throttle, and then the transmission is going to start varying the ratio. In the Honda and Kia CVTs, we feel what is more like a traditional shift. So you step on the accelerator pedal and you don't get anything right away, but then a moment later you do, because what's happened is the engine and transmission computer are working together. You've floored it. Transmission says, aha, we need acceleration. It then shifts ratios and then it applies full throttle to the engine, giving you that acceleration. The feel is a little bit more traditional, but it also ultimately gets you there faster than what we see in some of the other designs. And the Toyota transmission is somewhere in the middle. It shifts definitely more rapidly than the Nissan transmissions, but not as rapidly as the Hyundai, Kia, and Honda transmissions. Is the YouTube auto review community close and tight? I saw a Cameo and Corolla Redline reviews earlier today. I guess it really depends. Some of us are friends and some of us are not. Some of us we don't know. But you do see the same people at events all the time. So, I see Roman Micah and his whole crew from TFL Car at every event. Obviously, Sophie and I end up at events frequently. We end up driving together frequently because we're both slightly smaller outlets than a big outfit like TFL Car. So we don't always get to take a videographer with us to events, so we end up in cars at the same time. And there are a number of other video outlets there that we'll end up with at the same time too. There's a lady from Sinclair Broadcasting that I drive with frequently at launch events, that sort of thing. So I would say yes. And you see these people all the time, so it's definitely a community in a way. It'll be interesting to see a true base Model 3 reviewed so you can see what you get and don't get. That's exactly why we're getting that particular model. What $35,000 car would be the most fun and best value? That is a tricky question. I would say it really depends greatly on what exactly you're expecting from your $35,000 car. Acura RDX all-wheel drive or Kia Stinger all-wheel drive. I would Kia Stinger if you're okay with something that's car-like. The Stinger is an awful lot of fun and it's more powerful with that twin-turbo V6 engine. New dad that wants something sporty that can have rear-facing seats, as well as taking a mountain bike laying flat. Both of those actually would be fine in the Stinger. Rear seat headroom is not great in the Stinger, but overall legroom is not bad. Corolla CVT was not recalled. That's talking about CVTs there. Moving along. Let's see here. Thoughts on Jaguar ditching the 3-liter supercharged engine for the XC? Jaguar does not have a choice. They have to comply with corporate average fuel economy numbers, so expect some other changes in the Jaguar lineup soon. It is our guess that rumor mills have been saying this for a while, but it's my guess that the 5-liter V8 will be next on the chopping block. When do we expect a new version of the TLX to be announced? I am sad that we haven't seen it already, so hopefully next year, but we haven't really seen too much. Do we see a hybrid or plug-in hybrid version for the TLX? We also don't know, although I do know that we should not expect the TLX to be economy focused. I've had this argument in a way with some engineers at Acura over the last few years, but according to them, we will never see the Honda Accord hybrid system in the TLX, which I think is a great pity. I would love it if there was an entry in that segment that had high fuel economy, because nobody else really does. But supposedly, Acura will be focused on performance. Now, you should expect the new version of the TLX to be based on the same platform that's under the RDX, and we should also expect to see the upcoming RDX twin-turbo V6 under that hood with the 10-speed automatic transmission. So that should be fun, but probably not hybrid or plug-in hybrid. What happened to the lighting? I think it might be the motion sensor in this particular office is a little crazy. Let's see here. So torn between buying a fuel-efficient TLX, G80, or comfy Volvo S60. That is an interesting set of comparisons there. I do like the comfy S60. I think if my personal cash were on the line, I would be tempted to S60 or G70 over the TLX if it was my money. And I might get the S60. Let's see here. Thoughts and reliability of the S5 Sportback. General reliability has been okay in the Audi brand. Again, not as reliable as something like a Lexus, but overall, not too bad for the luxury set. I would say that the one big thing to remember with Audi products that have the dual clutch transmissions, which does not include all versions of the A5 platform. Some have the traditional automatic, some use the dual clutch. I believe the S5 now uses a traditional 8-speed. Don't quote me on that one, I might get that wrong. But the Audi dual clutch transmissions do require frequent fluid changes compared to an automatic transmission. That can get more expensive, so keep that in mind. Is Buick becoming an all-crossover brand? It is possible because, of course, General Motors left Opel, sold them. And now that Opel is gone, we don't have the European product portfolio to draw from. So all of the European-focused models are likely going to get whacked and replaced by something else. So we have the Buick Envision from China. We will probably be getting more of their Chinese models coming into the US, would be my guess. Remember that the average Buick owner is not blue-haired and living in Kansas. The average Buick owner is young and living in China. So Buick's brand is probably going to need to adjust a little bit in that way. Moving along, Audi Q7 versus BMW X7. Is the X7 worth the extra cash? I haven't driven it, but by the looks of it, I would definitely say yes. The X7 just looks gorgeous. Nothing wrong intrinsically with the Q7, but the Q7 does come across as sort of the Audi minivan in a way. It's big, it's comfy, but it's not particularly exciting necessarily. Overall handling is actually a little bit better in the XC90, but again, it's big and roomy. Handling is definitely better in the MDX, but again, the Q7 is big and roomy. It also is well priced. There's nothing wrong with the pricing on the Q7. It's very, very appropriate, so it's a good value there. But overall, the Q7 I think is just more attractive inside and outside. It feels more modern than the Q7. And we definitely have features in the X7 that we don't see in the Q7. So my thoughts, personally, I would, if I had the cash, I would probably X7 before Q7. And if I didn't have the cash, I would XC90 before I Q7'd. New generation of RDX power plant and transmission. Yep, that's what we're hearing. Looking for a really comfy highway ride. MKC. Yes, I love the MKC for its highway ride. I've noted that in our review. It's actually a pretty old review, so I apologize for that. But if you get the MKC with the adaptive suspension, the ride is absolutely fantastic. And personally, I hope that the upcoming Aviator has that same kind of really soft, nice ride to it. Because as you've noticed, if you're looking for a soft, compliant ride, there aren't many options for you anymore. Buicks are not softly sprung anymore. The Chrysler 300 even is not terribly soft. It's softer than average, but it's not terribly soft. Camry is relatively soft, but even it is trying a sportier vein. So I would say, yeah, MKC is a good option. The K900 is not bad. It's relatively nicely priced, but it is expensive compared to the MKC. And after that, you're basically looking at more of the full-on luxury set, like the Mercedes E-Class has an optional air suspension that's very comfortable, etc. The The Lexus ES actually is very comfortable as well. You might be interested in looking at something like that. Is the next generation Rogue coming in 2020? We don't really know when the next generation Rogue is coming, so hopefully we will see that soon. Let's skip ahead to some of these problems. I apologize if I'm skipping over you, but we are almost at an hour here, so we will try and answer more of your more recent questions here. What is my opinion on the Hyundai 7-speed DCT? My Velosters is funky unless warmed up. I actually have always liked the Hyundai Kia 7-speed DCT, but I would say that if you're expecting automatic transmission smoothness, then you're barking up the wrong tree. Remember that a dual clutch transmission is a robotic manual. So inside the transmission, it's a manual transmission. The way the gears are cut, it has clutches, there are actual dry clutches in the Hyundai transmission. It is a manual, and the robot's doing the shifting. So with that in mind, there are some slight differences for the automation system. So there are some sort of different shift patterns that are used when the engine is cold and the transmission is cold. It's mainly the engine being cold there is why it's shifting a little bit differently. But personally, I'm okay with that. The big difference is going to be in stop and go and slow and go traffic, where you're creeping along and then almost stopping but not quite stopping, and then creeping and then creeping. Remember, the clutch is going in and out just like you would see with the manual transmission, so it's never going to be as smooth. But on the flip side, they're very efficient and it shifts very quickly, so you get better performance, better fuel economy, but you don't have as smooth of an experience. And that's why we saw Hyundai with the Tucson put the DCT in the Tucson and then take it back out of the Tucson later, because they did it for fuel economy and performance. People said they didn't like it, so they pulled it back out. But it's still definitely here to stay, and that's why we see it optional in a lot of the models in their lineup. We see it optional in the Sonata, for instance, optional in the Elantra, the Eco version, etc., and we see it in things like the Kia Soul, the Veloster, etc. So I think it's definitely here to stay, but definitely keep its design in mind. And I would actually say that that's why I like to cover the way things work here on this channel, in addition to how they feel, because I think that understanding what's going on under the skin will at least make you a little bit more aware of why it's doing what it's doing. And that goes for the ZF 9-speed, dual clutch transmissions, hybrid systems, etc. Anything that's a little bit outside the norm of just a naturally aspirated engine and a 6-speed auto. Why did we stop doing the car seat videos? We weren't getting the viewer traction on the car seat videos, so I've asked this before. If you love the car seat separate video concept, then let us know in the comment section below. We might try and resurrect them again this year. We do have a new editor starting here. She actually just started last week, but she's off today, so I'm live showing all by myself here. I apologize for that, but she will actually be doing more videos for us as far as being behind the camera, helping with the editing. That will free me up to do more of those specialty videos, like our videos on best cars of the year, child seat videos, infotainment, focuses, some technology explanation videos, etc. And if that's really something that everybody wants to see, we'll start doing them again. But instead, in videos on cars that are theoretically family focused, I hate to use that word in a way because families buy all sorts of vehicles, but vehicles that are definitely targeted at that family that has young children, then we'll do a segment within the video. For instance, the upcoming CX-9, we put a child seat in the 40% side and demonstrated its use and ease of use getting in and out of the back. We've done that with the Subaru Ascent, the Volkswagen Atlas, etc. So we've tried to sort of integrate them into the videos that way rather than doing the separate video. What kind of charger will the Polestar 2 use? Do all EVs use different connectors and voltage? Aha, this is an interesting point here. So EVs, all EVs sold in the US can charge via AC power using the J1772 standard charging connector. It's the one that you see looks kind of like a little fuel handle. It has a little, it's about this big around or so, the face part of it, and it has 4 connectors in there. I believe it's 4. 2 for, actually it's more like 5. 2 for AC, 1 for ground, and then some signaling connectors as well. That's the main one that you're going to see in all of the EVs out there, except for Tesla. Tesla decided to use their own proprietary charge connector, and that is one of the things that I really disagree with Tesla on. Teslas have an adapter, so you can adapt from a J1772 to the charge connector on a modern Tesla. And there are connectors that go the other way, but there's a great deal of question as to whether that is correct in using it, because the destination charges are oftentimes provided free or subsidized by Tesla. So those all use the same connector. Then when it comes to DC fast charging, there are three main standards in the US. We have the Tesla standard, Tesla superchargers. Those can go up to 120 kilowatts at the moment. Faster ones will be coming. Those are only Tesla vehicles can charge at those stations. There's no mechanism for another vehicle, even if you could adapt the connector, to charge at those stations. So if you're buying an I-Pace or an E-Tron or a Kona or anything else, forget the supercharger network. It's not going to do you any good. Then we have the Chatham O Chargers, which were the original DC fast charge standard. That's still supported by Mitsubishi and Nissan. It uses a large chunky connector. It's sort of small coffee can sized and has 4 connectors in there. That can charge currently at a maximum of about 60 kilowatts. That particular connector is sort of on the decline in the US. We still are seeing a few new installations, but it's not the connector that's favored here. If you have a Tesla, you can get an adapter to go from the Chatham O charge connector to the Tesla connector, because Tesla's using the same signaling technology that Chatham O does to DC fast charge their vehicles. So you can adapt from one to the other, but your Tesla's not going to charge as fast. It's going to charge at 60 kilowatts max instead of the 120, and that is if you can find a 60 kilowatt station. Some of those Chatham O stations are down there around 30, 40 kilowatts because of the vehicles that use them. Then we have the newest of the standards, which is the SAE combo connector. This was initially supported by General Motors and BMW, but since then everybody's hopped on board. So all of the other EVs that you see out there today, except for the Tesla and the Leaf, will use the SAE combo connector. Oh, I should say the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid uses the Chatham O. It's the only one left. The new Kia Soul EV is moving from Chatham O to the SAE combo connector. The SAE combo connector theoretically can go up to 350 kilowatts, much, much higher than the Tesla connector can at the moment, although basically nothing can actually do that yet because there are no stations and there are no vehicles yet. 150 is the maximum that you can get out of that connector now, if your vehicle supports it. It uses 2 pins below the J1772 connector. The connector housing kind of looks like this, kind of like this round thing up top, and then this section down there at the bottom. That is a really bad drawing, mind you. There are 2 connectors down here, and then there are the other connectors up in here in this area, sort of along those lines. Anyway, that was a really bad drawing. Pardon me for that. It is theoretically not adaptable to the Model 3, Model S, Model X, although I have heard rumors that there is a way to adapt the European combo connector, which is similar to the Tesla platform, that is either in process or is being worked on or finally out. The details are a little sketchy on that one, but that adapter is probably going to be considerably more expensive because of the way that the different charging standards actually function internally. At any rate, that's how that lines up. So there are these 3 different DC fast charge networks across the world, and in the US, there is just one AC charge standard theoretically that's adaptable to the Tesla, but the Tesla uses a different plug. So hopefully that's helped answer that question. What do we own currently? So currently here at Alex Autos, we have a 2016 Kia Soul EV, a 2018 Dodge Durango, and a 2000 Jeep Grand Cherokee. And soon we have an order in on the Model 3 base model. We also have an order in on a RAV4 Adventure, so hopefully those will happen here soon. But those are going to be short-term vehicles that we're going to review and then sell on after a few months. Who's next to kill sedans like Ford and GM? I'm thinking that that's probably going to be it for now. We do see solid sales in the sedans that are left in the Chrysler lineup, but that's probably about it. Let's see here. Forester XT or the new Mazda CX-5 Turbo? I would CX-5 Turbo. The whole vehicle just feels more modern, and it really is very, very pretty. Honda Accord Hybrid worth it. I heard MPGs are in the 30s. Now, due to the overall design of the Honda hybrid system, fuel economy may not be as high as you want. So the key thing to remember with all of the Honda hybrid systems is that as you get up over highway speeds, so up over 65 miles an hour, fuel economy starts really dropping. It's going to drop in any vehicle, of course, the faster you go, but the drop is more pronounced in the Honda systems. So if you are driving a Honda Accord hybrid and you're out on the highway going 75, 80 miles an hour, then yes, high 30s is what you should expect in terms of overall fuel economy. If you're gentle and you keep it to 65 miles an hour, then you could get closer to the EPA rating. So that's the big deal there. Do you think an upgrade from Armado Platinum to Infiniti QX80 is worth it versus the price premium? I would say probably, especially depending on the deal you could get on the QX80. I like the overall look of the QX80 a little bit more. Some people think it's funky, but I like the overall look. And you may actually get a better deal on, for instance, a lease on the QX80 than on the Armada. Let's see here. Toyota IM or Lexus CT200H, which one? That is a tricky one. I would say if you're looking at those, why not just get a new Toyota Corolla hatchback? It just feels more modern. Why some cars or SUVs have long wheelbases? What's the pro and con of a long wheelbase? So generally long wheelbases give you a more supple ride because when the front suspension interacts with something on the road and then the rear suspension interacts, it can stretch out that delay over a longer period of time. So they generally have a more plush, more stable ride that way. And the big reason that we're seeing long wheelbases in a lot of cars, especially SUVs, is just that the footprint gets bigger, so you get a bigger gimme when it comes to the corporate average fuel economy test. That's why we see so many big trucks in America too. Let's see here, RAV4 versus CRV for wife and 2 kids. That's a tricky one. I really like the CRV very much right now. RAV4, it's hard to go wrong with. There's the hybrid model too. I would say I'm a little bit more bullish on the RAV4 hybrid than the regular model. The regular model I was a tiny bit disappointed in versus the CRV. I think the CRV probably is a little bit better in my opinion. In your review of various plug-in hybrid vehicles, what stood out to you in regards not only reliability but quality? We've reviewed all of the plug-in hybrids really out there at the moment, and they're all similar themed for the most part. There's some exceptions. Most of them are just trying to shift some of your consumption from gasoline to electricity. That's the important thing to keep in mind. For instance, the Subaru Crosstrek plug-in hybrid that we have this week right now. If you drive it over 64 miles an hour or so, it turns on the engine. So if you have the battery fully charged, you leave home, you hop immediately onto the highway and set the cruise control to 72 miles an hour, it's going to take you about 35 miles or so to actually consume the entire battery on level interstate travel because it has to turn on the engine in order to actually drive down the road at those speeds, just due to the overall design of the transmissions, the hybrid transmission that's at issue there. So, but you're still going to get better fuel economy than if you didn't charge the battery. So that's really the world that those vehicles live in. That disappoints people that want to go pure EV. And the use case, I guess, for plug-in hybrids, I don't think has been fully explained to a lot of folks out there. Some people dislike the fact that the engine turns on. Some people dislike the fact that you have to charge it. I'm not sure if they're the right solution for everybody, but I also think that more people would be interested in them if they really understood them, I guess, better. Dodge Challenger Scat Pack or Mustang GT? I would say clearly it should be Dodge Charger SRT. That would be my pick. K900 CPO 2016, $20,000. That's a great deal. Yep. Let's see here. Electric vehicles decrease range in cold or hot temperatures, particularly cold temperatures. Is it true? Okay, so let's talk about cold weather in EVs. So yes, this is true. Cold weather testing in EVs is a tricky topic. The main source of range loss with any of the modern EVs, and this would be specifically focusing especially on the active heated and active cooled battery EVs like the Chevy Bolt, the upcoming Soul and Nero EV, the Kona EV in Canada, because in America it's not going to get actively heated, and the Tesla lineup. The big energy loss is in heating the cabin, not in loss just due to cold weather. So if it's 20 degrees outside or 0 degrees outside Fahrenheit, you are going to lose a little bit in terms of the chemical reaction going on in the battery itself, and you may lose a little bit in the battery heating system to try and keep the battery warm and up at a good temperature where the chemical reaction can happen at a good rate. But most of what you're losing is actually due to cabin heating. Now remember that the Model 3 and the Model S and the Model X, the models reviewed in those reports where they're talking about this range loss, remember that they do not have a heat pump system. So all the heat that you want in that cabin is being generated by an electric resistive element heater, or it's being drawn out of the electric motors, the battery packs, whatever else is generating heat. They're trying to scavenge that to heat the cabin. But there's not a lot of heat going on. Now, this is different than in a gasoline vehicle. A gasoline vehicle is going to actually get lower fuel economy in cold weather as well, but the loss is not going to be as pronounced because you're using waste energy to heat the cabin. And if it's very cold, you could be consuming 5 to 10 kilowatts, depending on the vehicle, just heating the cabin, sitting stationary. You're at a stoplight, doing nothing, just heating the cabin. You could be consuming a great deal of power. So it depends on how you're using the heater. So that's why in electric vehicles we see heated steering wheels and heated seats and that sort of thing. Because heating the steering wheel and heating the seats is much more energy effective as far as use of energy than heating air to heat the cabin. Also remember that versus cooling the cabin, you're going to see a more pronounced effect because the delta between your target cabin temperature and the outside is much, much larger. So if you want to keep your cabin at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and it's 100 degrees outside, that's a 30-degree delta that you're air conditioning down into. But if it is 0 degrees outside and you want to heat the cabin to 70, that's a 70-degree variance. That's much, much larger. And in that, to get to that delta, resistive element heaters are far less efficient. You will see a much narrower drop in vehicles that have heat pump systems. And unfortunately, mainly due to cost reasons, we don't see heat pumps yet in Tesla models. But we do see them available in something like a Leaf, and we see them available in the Kia line of EVs. This current Soul, the new Niro will have available heat pump systems. For some reason, we don't see one in the Kona unless you live in Canada. Then we get a heat pump. Heat pumps are moving heat from one location to the other. There's been a lot of talk about, what happens with heat pump systems when the temperatures really start dropping. Well, older heat pump designs did have problems heating and providing effective heat at lower temperatures. But modern heat pump systems don't have that same problem. And even if we're talking about older heat pump systems, they're still more than 100% efficient. You wonder why that's possible. Well, you could be more than 100% efficient because you're not creating new heat. You're using the expansion properties of gases where you're compressing them and then allowing them to expand, converting states from liquid to gaseous states and back and forth to move heat from one location to the other. This process obviously consumes energy. So say it takes 1,000 watts to run this system, but you're generating as much heat as, say, a 4,000 watt heater would provide you. So this system is 400% efficient. Now, most modern heat pump systems, even when temperatures drop well below 0, are still going to be over 200% efficient. So still going to give you more heating for that range. Long story short, that's the bulk of the loss. Also remember that generally speaking, when temperatures are cold, the tires are not going to be as efficient because the rubber is going to bend differently. It's going to resist things differently. And there's the possibility of snow or water on the road. And one thing that you really will notice in an electric vehicle, if you're really driving for 100 miles through rain the whole time, is the water on the road actually has a noticeable impact on your overall efficiency because it's going to increase drag and reduce that range there. So with that out of the way, let's tootle along here. Do we think the 10-speed autos are overkill? Do we suspect at some point every vehicle will move to CVTs? I don't think 10 speeds are overkill. We actually see a positive reason to use them in some vehicles out there. Most notably, diesel vehicles will actually benefit from 10-speed automatic transmissions because they have such a narrow power band. Also, transmissions that really expand the ratio spread are going to be a big improvement. And that's really what we see, for instance, in the Honda 10-speed and the ZF 9-speed automatic, is the ability to give you a very aggressive first gear for fast performance, which is what people want, and then a very high final gear for highway fuel economy, which is also what folks seem to be interested in. So I don't necessarily think that they're overkill. The big reason that we'll still continue to see stepped automatics over CVTs in some segments is that continuously variable transmissions don't do well with high torque engines. And that's why we don't see CVTs in, for instance, Honda's 2-liter turbo. They'll use it in the 1.5, but not the 2-liter turbo. We'd see CVTs in Nissan's naturally aspirated V6s, but not paired with higher horsepower turbocharged engines in anybody's lineup out there. And you won't really see CVTs in vehicles that are designed to tow heavy weights. I'm talking 7,000 plus pounds. We do have some of the Nissan vehicles with their chain drive CVTs that are designed to tow about 5,000 pounds or so, perhaps even 6, but we don't see them in that next towing category up. And remember that CVTs by themselves don't necessarily have that broad of a ratio spread either. So distance between the lowest gear and the highest gear is going to be broader in those more modern 10-speed designs than any of the CVTs currently out there. Why doesn't GM make safety features available on all models and why not standard like Asian companies? The big reason there is base price. So remember that even though MSRP is oftentimes higher on GM's products, their actual transaction price is lower. So when you look at, say, a Equinox versus a CRV or a RAV4, you're going to be able to get that Equinox for less at the dealer. So even though it's not standard, getting those features in some of the vehicles is not necessarily going to be that much more, but it's all very cost related. Now that said, GM just does not seem to be totally on board with the full suite of active safety features, which is why for some reason we still don't find adaptive cruise control on any of the Silverados at the moment. I do find that particularly vexing since everybody else has done this, and we even find it now in the Ram 2500, 3500 with all of their latest gadgets. So I think that is kind of odd. X5 versus RX, I would X5. The RX is going to be more reliable, but the X5 is going to be more fun. What do we think of Nissan CVTs? They're definitely very efficient, but they're not as fun as some of the other transmissions out there, but they're there because of overall efficiency. Do we think Android Auto will be a software update on all Entune 3 systems? We have not received an answer on that one. I've asked Toyota very, very directly, and I've received a variety of different responses from no comment, which is the most common one, to I don't think so, as being the least one. I'm not sure where that lies. Toyota has never really created a software update that's given us extra functionality, so I would suspect that the answer would be no, but I could be wrong. I hope that I'm wrong, but I suspect no. Best budget all-wheel drive crossover that isn't dog slow. I would say Hyundai Kona with the 1.6-liter turbo. That is an awful lot of fun. You can get it with all-wheel drive, and it actually is pretty quick for that segment. That would be a budget option there. Moving along here. YouTube is very strange with their comment section here. Sorry for the pause here. How is the Durango doing? Durango's doing fine, but again, remember that I am a sample set of one, so my Durango might be lovely, yours might not be. Look at reliability metrics if you want to see reliability metrics, but I'm actually still very glad that we got the Durango. The Durango tows like a champ. It is not a lightweight vehicle, and the curb weight and the overall size, wheelbase, etc. of the Durango is why it tows very well. Our Durango spends probably half of its time with a trailer connected to it, and that's exactly why we bought it. Honda Civic versus Kia Forte. I'm torn on that one, and we actually have a recent video on the Forte to help answer that question. I would say Forte in some trims, Civic in some trims. If my money were on the line, probably the Civic. Civic with 1.5-liter turbo. It's just an awful lot of fun. Why do some engines use a timing belt uses a chain? Belt versus chain is a debate that I've had with a lot of people. Different engineering targets is just the easy reason there. There's some advantages to either one. Chain's more difficult to replace. Chain is theoretically more reliable, although it is worth noting that even in vehicles that use a timing chain, oftentimes the tensioners or the guides have to be replaced on a particular schedule as well. That schedule may be longer than a timing belt, but they still need to get replaced. So it's not like you get a timing chain engine and you can just drive it a million miles without ever doing anything to the timing mechanism, the timing linkage there. Depending on the vehicle, you may need to replace those guides. So definitely especially essential, for instance, in the Jaguar AJ V8 engines. And the downside to that is generally with a timing chain, because of the longer duty cycle, they're a total pain to actually work on. Timing belts are still a pain, but generally speaking, easier. The big difference is timing chains are louder, generally speaking, than timing belts. So the belt mechanism is quieter, and that is one of the reasons often cited. Timing belts may also be less expensive, but that's actually a hard one to prove because when you're designing a brand new engine, the cost delta is not going to be huge. And the timing belt designs are good for typically 100,000 miles or so before you have to replace it. Actual replacement costs vary, but a timing belt is something that a shade tree mechanic with a reasonable amount of skill could do themselves. I have replaced a timing chain, and it is not something I would ever want to do again. But a timing belt, I will do. I will do that myself, if that helps you. Let's see here. Thoughts on Subaru Outback 6-cylinder last year. I have never liked the Outback 6-cylinder engine. I know that I might be in the minority there, but I have never liked the 6-cylinder. It puts an awful lot of weight in front of the front axle. There's already a lot of weight there anyway. The 6-cylinder was never that powerful. I am totally fine with Subaru replacing it with the turbo. If you're torn between 6-cylinder or new one with the turbo, I'd new one with the turbo any day. That's my thought right there. When are we getting a new Chrysler 300? Probably the 12th of never, because it's selling okay and it's just printing cash. FCA doesn't really seem to be too interested in replacing products that are selling okay and just make money. And that goes for the Grand Cherokee, the Durango, the Charger, the Challenger, the 300, etc. Their sales numbers are fairly stable. There are replacement plans, obviously, like any company would have them. But I think that what's happening inside FCA is they've been pushing them out a little bit to ride the cash wave. FCA is strangely profitable. Well, actually, I shouldn't say strangely profitable. I should just say very profitable. FCA is making a lot of cash right now. And so it seems like they're delaying some of this until later because the cash machine is just flowing. And I think that some of the cash is being consumed with Fiat because Fiat's really stinking up the sales charts. Fiat sales have been really bad. Not just in the US, actually, but worldwide, Fiat's been stumbling a little bit. So, you know, the engine is not running on all 8 cylinders at the moment. Is the Buick Enclave better than the Volkswagen Atlas? I wouldn't necessarily say better, I would say different. I like the Volkswagen Atlas for its family friendliness, and it's also very practical because it's big and it's square. It's also less expensive than the Enclave, so there we go. RAV4 or Forester for $35,000? That's an interesting question. RAV4 or Forester for $35,000? I would generally say neither for $35,000. For $35,000, I would say CX-5 or CR-V. I think that the Forester does best in its base to midline trims, depending on which trim you're looking at. If you're looking at the top 2 trims of the Forester, then I would start looking at something else. The bottom 2 trims, the Forester is a great deal. Excellent base equipment, standard all-wheel drive, roomy on the inside, comfortable to drive, quiet, etc. Good fuel economy, excellent option there. The trouble is by the time you get to the top end trims, it's about the same cost as something like the CX-5 Signature or the top end trims of the CR-V, and the interior is nicer in the CX-5 and in the CR-V, and the CR-V gets more power out of its turbo and nicer fittings. Let's see here. EVs come in and fuel economy is not so critical using electricity. Would you imagine return to older style suspensions if it were smoother? I would argue about fuel economy there because fuel economy is still critical in an EV because it costs you money. Especially, a lot of folks don't think about this one, but remember that if you are fast charging your EV or if you're public charging your EV, then you're paying a decent rate per kilowatt hour. You're paying actually quite a lot per kilowatt hour for that power. And the more miles you can get out of that kilowatt hour, the better off you are. Operating a Toyota Prius, for instance, in California, even at California gas prices, can be cheaper than DC fast charging your way around in a Nissan Leaf or public charging a Nissan Leaf. So keep those efficiency numbers in mind. That actually, I think, is something that a lot of people aren't thinking about with EVs. And again, that actually, a lot of people have accused me as being negative at Tesla, but actually that is one of their big saving graces there is I-Pace, E-Tron, any of these upcoming products, even by all appearances, the new Polestar 2, less efficient than a comparable Tesla model. Moving along here, how is it that Nissan CarPlay has CarPlay and Infiniti does not have CarPlay? That's because Nissan and Infiniti don't use the same software. This is what we get from people complaining that luxury car companies use the same infotainment software as non-luxury car companies. For instance, Maserati got a lot of flack for using Chrysler infotainment systems in the Levante and in the Quattroporte, etc. And that's why we have the crappy infotainment system, sorry for that word, in the Alfa Romeo lineup. Because people complained that they didn't like it. So instead, they had to go out and design a whole new system for Alfa Romeo, and it's just not as good. Similar to Acura. Acura's system is, I think, in my opinion, just not as well-rounded as the Honda system. The reason there is that they're not using the same software because people didn't like it. And it's a lot easier to put these features into systems that you're selling 1 million of. So Honda sells millions of the systems that are in the Accord, the Odyssey, the HR-V, etc. So it can be more polished, it can have those features sooner. Same thing with Nissan, they're selling more of those systems. So anytime you have the unique software, it's going to be a little bit behind the features, or it's going to be more expensive. And that's one of the reasons that BMW charges for Apple CarPlay. They need to get the money out in order to keep developing that system, because R&D on BMW systems is very expensive. They're very feature-rich, they're very modern, they're very competitive, but getting there is very expensive. And that's why we see some of those sideways fees in the luxury car companies to try and recoup some of that R&D. Let's see here. Volvo makes some of the best seats. I agree with you there. Volvo seats are very comfortable. What happened to the exclusive Trunk Comfort Index? The Trunk Comfort Index got whacked from our repertoire when we started doing the more detailed pricing and analysis sections at the end of the videos. So we just have trade-offs here. I'm always trying to keep the videos under 30 minutes. YouTube does not incentivize long videos, to be perfectly frank, because watch percentage is important. So even though you've watched 15 minutes of a video, that's only half. So watch percentage is important, and keeping the videos as condensed as we possibly can while still offering an insane level of information and absolute boredom is imperative. So you know, Trunk Comfort Index had to die. Let's see here. Elon likes to lick cats. I have not heard that. I've never tried to lick my cat. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. For teen drivers, what is safer, a 2000s XC70 or 2013, 2018 Outback? That is an interesting question. A lot of people ask a lot about, do I buy a used X, insert your car here, that is theoretically safe, or a new car? Generally speaking, new car would always be the safer option. Remember that the newer car is going to abide by all the latest crash standards, whether those are artificial crash standards or real-world tests. They're still going to be the latest iteration. And more importantly, in this particular cross, the mid-2000s XC70 is not going to have any of the active safety systems that you're going to find on the new Subaru Outback. And I would say definitely get the newer one with those active safety systems, whether you're talking about an Outback or any modern vehicle out there. The best way to protect yourself in an accident is to just not have the accident. So auto braking systems, adaptive cruise control systems for longer highway journeys, lane keeping assistance systems or lane departure monitoring, blind spots, rear crosstalk detection, all of those features are definitely going to make the overall experience safer for any driver. Some folks out there claim that they make people lazy. I don't necessarily agree with that. I know that some folks may rely a bit too heavily on them, but I would rather have them than not. Moving along here. Do you think hydrogen fuel cells will make it to the mainstream? I certainly hope they do, because they do answer a lot of questions that we have. The best way to think of a hydrogen fuel cell is just a different battery, because when we look at the Clarity, the Mirai, the Nexo, the old Santa Fe hydrogen, they're electric cars. They just happen to have a hydrogen battery on board. And so the two vehicle types are logically synergistic in this way, because the get you down the road part is the same. The motor, they still have a battery in them. They still have DC-DC charge systems, regenerative braking, all that kind of stuff still happens in a hydrogen vehicle. But what is producing and storing that power in the hydrogen vehicle is the fuel cell and the related hydrogen tanks. Now, there's a cart before the horse problem here. Hydrogen fuel cells are great, they're interesting, but where do you fill them up? There aren't very many hydrogen stations. Even in California, there aren't very many. I have been toying with the idea of getting a hydrogen car instead of after our lease is up in the Soul EV. No decisions have been made yet, but my office happens to be half a mile from one of the only hydrogen stations in the Bay Area. So for me, it would be relatively practical. But the county that I live in Santa Cruz County, there are no hydrogen filling stations in the entire county. So if I needed to go fill up there, that could be a problem. As far as I know, there are still no hydrogen fueling stations in Monterey County. So if I wanted to go from home and go to Carmel or go to Monterey for the weekend and then drive home, I would have to make sure that I had enough hydrogen to get all the way back to work to then fill up again, to then go back home and then do that again. So those are things to keep in mind. But the overall experience is more gasoline-like. You can fill up in 5 minutes. The hydrogen fuel cell stack is lighter in terms of overall weight than a battery of similar range. And although we have seen improvements in battery packaging and battery power density, we're not seeing improvements as rapidly in terms of weight as we've seen in the hydrogen fuel cell stack. So at the moment, getting 400 miles out of a hydrogen vehicle per tank is pretty easy. We're already 366 or so in the Nexo, so getting that next bump wouldn't really be a huge deal. But getting 400 miles of range out of something like a Tesla Model 3 actually would be a pretty big deal, because you'd have to double stack the batteries, and your battery pack could be 50% or more larger than a long-range Model 3. Remember that the more weight you add, the lower your efficiency goes. The two are definitely linked. So it's not like you would just add an extra 30% battery to the Model 3 to get you from 300 to 400 miles. You would have to go beyond that, maybe 40, perhaps even 50% more battery density. And that's going to add a lot of weight. So that's a problem there. What do we think of the Jaguar XF? I like the Jaguar XF. I think I like the styling on the older Jaguar midsize sedan a little bit better, but I like the Jaguar XF. It's a good value, but there are some better options out there, I think, when you talk about the overall package deal. Good value, excellent handling. Fuel economy could use a little bit of work. We'll see. Why is the load floor on minivans lower than SUVs? Ground clearance, lack of all-wheel drive, and just the overall design of the floor pan is different. So you'll notice with minivans, the rear axle will be here, and then the load floor will actually kind of curve around there, so that way the rear seats can go down. They're just really making effective use of that space. There's some downsides. They're not going to be as rigid as a crossover or SUV, the overall body structure. So that's a downside. They generally cannot accept all-wheel drive because of that overall design there. There are a lot of compromises when you take a look at the Sienna all-wheel drive, for instance, versus a Chrysler Pacifica, where you can stow the second row seats down in the floor, etc. So there are always compromises everywhere here. Do EVs have any issues in very cold weather? I think we've already covered that one. Let's see here. What about the CVT and the Corolla Hybrid in manual shifting mode? It's as good as any of the Toyota hybrids in imitating a manual transmission. Kia Telluride review, that is coming up in about 3 weeks. Quietest vehicle you can buy for $25,000 or less would likely be something like an Accord. That's probably going to be my guess right there. Looking like Lincoln's making a comeback, I would agree there. Let's see here. Seems like Lexus ES is indeed quieter than the Avalon. Is that true? That is true. One of the differences seems to be the overall amount of sound deadening, and the tires and wheels that we see on the Lexus are definitely focused towards quietness. Lexus likes to use some noise-canceling wheel technology that helps reduce road rumble, and we do see those in the ES. Accord or Accord Hybrid, which do I prefer? I would say if you're looking at any of the base Accords, I would go Accord Hybrid personally. You are going to get better fuel economy, but you're also going to get better overall performance. Now, the fuel economy may not be quite what Honda is suggesting if you drive at higher highway speeds, still going to be better than the regular model. Would we do a video on the Range Rover Sport? I have actually been asking about that, but it has not made its way to our local market. Latest status on Genesis dealerships in the US. There are still a lot of states where you cannot buy a Genesis, but you can go to other states, buy a Genesis, take it back home, and get it serviced by Hyundai dealers that were formerly able to service Genesis models. I have been told that that should work. Any major or minor changes to Chrysler Pacifica in 2018-2019? How's reliability? No major huge changes there, although we have seen a few feature tweaks here and there, especially on the hybrid model, things that are now available on the hybrid that weren't before. Overall reliability has actually not been too bad. It may not be where the Sienna is, but overall reliability is going to be a little bit below those other options, but I think the practicality outweighs it. I think it's pretty obvious why Chrysler outsells everybody else in the minivan segment overall, because they're just very practical vehicles. We have the fold-in floor, second row seats. You can leave child seats latched into place, still flip and fold them forward in order to get to the third row. All that extra storage under there. Even if you get the hybrid model, we still get very practical second row situations where even though that space is used up by the battery, we can pull them out. We have a full flat floor, which we don't find in the top-end versions of the Odyssey, for instance. I would also say, remember that the Odyssey uses the same 9-speed automatic transmission as the Pacifica, so if you're worried about the transmission in the Pacifica, you should also be worried about it in the Odyssey. You only get the Honda's transmission in the very top-end trims of the Odyssey. Let's see here. Someone's living in Ottawa and they're considering getting a Jeep or a CX-5 all-wheel drive versus 4x4. In the snow, they're not going to be very far apart other than the ground clearance. The CX-5 is closer to the ground. So if you're living in an area that's not frequently plowed, the Jeep could be the better option. But if you are in an area that regularly gets plowed, you should be fine. The one thing I would obviously suggest is that the tires are going to be the big thing. Obviously in Ottawa, you're going to be under Canada's snow tire rules, I'm assuming, in your area, so you're going to have them in the winter anyway. But I would say spend the money on a better set of winter tires than worrying about the all-wheel drive system necessarily. That's generally my advice. Which were you more excited about, the Toyota 4Runner or the Tundra? I'm probably more excited about the tweaks on the 4Runner. The Tundra has always been kind of a head-scratcher for me because Toyota hasn't really focused on the base models as well or the top-end trims as well, I think, as the Americans. The Tundra often seems to sort of a little bit less left behind. My lease for the Soul, is there any mileage limitation? Yes, my current Soul EV lease was 12,000 miles a year, but we'll be under that in our new one. CX-5 versus MKC. I would say if you're looking for a soft ride, MKC. If you're looking for a sportier ride, then CX-5. Upcoming X3M or GLC63. GLC63 probably a little bit less likely than the X3M, but I'm not entirely clear what they will be sending to my local area. If one just trips across me, I will review it. But if they don't, then I'm not going to ask for one. As far as which would I pick between the X3M and the GLC63, I would go with the GLC63. That engine sounds incredible, and it also got a new interior, so I like the interior tweaks for the GLC. That's my opinion there. When do we expect to review the killer Telluride or Hyundai Palisade? So Telluride review should be up in about 3 weeks or so. There'll be a first drive. We'll get a full review when it comes out here. Probably in about 2 months would be my guess. And the Palisade I have not heard too much on yet, but hopefully we'll have that soon as well. Why don't all manufacturers have dual direct injection such as Toyota and Ford if carbon buildup is an issue? Carbon buildup is a tricky subject because some people are very opinionated on this, some people aren't. We haven't seen carbon buildup as a huge issue on all engine designs, so it doesn't necessarily translate that if you don't have port and direct injection that you will get carbon buildup. But by that same token, it does appear to be one way to be sure that you don't get carbon buildup. So I would say it just depends on the design of the system. And at this point in time, we should have pretty good data on which engine designs are more or less prone to that than others. So you can steer towards or away from one or the other. Volkswagen Atlas or Ford 2020. I would explore 2020 if you are interested in towing or if you are after driving dynamics, and I would Atlas if you're looking for the bigger, more practical thing, because the Atlas is going to have a little bit more practical cargo area, it looks like, than the new Explorer. The Explorer's cargo area has shrunk down a little bit, and overall interior volume has reduced a little bit as well. As always with the rear-wheel drive vehicle, the engine entirely under the hood up front in order to package everything the way that it has to be for the rear-wheel drive layout just results in a less efficient vehicle overall. That's why my Durango is considerably longer than a Toyota Highlander at over 200 inches long. But interior volume is actually closer to the Highlander than something like a Volkswagen Atlas. How come we've never reviewed the BRZ 86? We actually have. So, gosh, it's been a long time, though, since I've had the BRZ or FRS at the time. So you probably want to, the review that you're looking for would be the Scion FRS back then in the Scion days. That's the one you should look for. Although it is possible that it's been so long since I drove it that I didn't video it. That's possible too. I may have just written about it in a former life. At any rate, I have driven it. Nothing's changed, so that's why we haven't done it again. And it doesn't sell in huge numbers. Do we know when the Sienna is going to get a complete redesign? It does not appear anytime soon. Why did I buy the Dodge Durango over the Kia Sorento? This is a case of do as I say, not as I do. I bought the Durango because of its towing ability. And again, my Durango spends probably half of its lifetime with a trailer connected to it. It tows over 7,000 pounds, and that's the target range for us. We needed to be able to do 7,500 pounds, which the Durango does just fine, and you would not be able to do in the Sorento. So that is the reason. Is the Sorento better? It depends on what you're after. In some metrics, it could be. I find the driver's seat in the Sorento more comfortable. The Sorento is more fuel efficient. Depending on what you're doing, a stock Sorento would outhandle the Durango in some situations as well. And actually the Sorento doesn't have that much less room on the inside than the Durango either, because again, the Durango has that big hood up front, not as practically shaped. But for my use case, the Dodge was by far the best choice there. Touareg or RAV4, I'm assuming you might be thinking Tiguan since the Touareg is dead in America or you're living overseas. Tiguan or RAV4 would be my guess. What you mean? Tricky. I like the Tiguan actually a little bit more than I like the RAV4, just sort of general terms, but the RAV4 it'd be hard to not get the RAV4. The RAV4 is a solid option, can't go wrong with it. I might get the Tiguan, especially if you wanted that occasional use third row in the back. What's my favorite infotainment system? In the luxury segment, I would say my favorite is probably BMW's iDrive. In the mainstream segment, that is tricky. You have me stumped there. Probably Uconnect. I actually really like the way Uconnect works. But then functionally, the GM system and the Ford systems are not far behind. I used to really like Sync, but I think that other transmissions have, other infotainment systems have managed to get some edge over what Ford did there. Would you consider the ZF transmission the best there is out there? If not, which? Specifically, the ZF 8-speed rear-wheel drive transmission, I think, is the pinnacle of transmission refinement at the moment in the world. It's just a very impressive 8-speed. The gear ratio spread is lovely. The shift quality is great. The shift speed is great. They make transmissions that can handle almost 1,000 horsepower and incredible amounts of torque. It's just a lovely transmission, the ZF 8-speed. I'm a little sad that FCA didn't try and stick one in the 2500 and 3500. I would have thought that there would have been one that could have been made to fit that mold. But I would say that close second, actually, to that would be the Toyota Lexus 8-speed rear-wheel drive automatic transmission. That's a lovely transmission as well. Moving along, let's see here. How old is Beatrice? I'm assuming you mean my cat. My cat, I think, is 5 now, but I'm really bad at that, so she could be younger or older. Should I get an accurate TLX or RDX practicality, reliability? I would get the RDX because it gets the new 10-speed transmission, and the one thing that I really dislike about the TLX is that ZF 9-speed. I understand why the ZF 9-speed is the way that it is, but I think that if I had the choice, I would avoid getting it. That would be my own personal thought there. Weirdest infotainment you've ever reviewed has to be, hands down, be the Alfa Romeo infotainment system. I dislike that one. And the second would be any Lexus with the touchpad controller. They're terrible. That's just me. Let's see here. German cars, scary to own in terms of reliability and repair costs. Mainly thinking Volkswagen. Volkswagen's repair costs are definitely more mainstream than BMW. So if you're buying a VW, don't expect BMW, Mercedes kind of repair costs, but they do appear to be higher and more frequent than Toyota or Honda. Redesign of the Pathfinder. Haven't heard anything, but I sure hope that happens soon. Any SUVs with rear floor to ceiling height of 42 to 44 inches trying to fit a bike inside with wheels on? That is an interesting question. I don't normally measure them, but I'm going to go ahead and think that if you've tried something like the Atlas and it doesn't fit, then you're in minivan territory, pretty much. What do I think about the 2019 RAV4 Hybrid? Solid hybrid, good fuel economy, actually very impressive fuel economy, I should say. I dislike Toyota's all-wheel drive systems, however, in a way they just don't perform as well in adverse weather conditions as I would like, but they're better than not having a rear axle that does, that does nothing. So that's definitely better. Are we going to get a Durango owner's update? Yes, I hope that that will come soon. It should be about a year old here in 4 months, maybe. So I think that we're going to do a 1-year update on that one. What happened to the Volkswagen Touareg? Is it coming back? The answer is definitely no. The Touareg proved too expensive for American tastes, and Volkswagen said that we just don't deserve it. In a nutshell, Mazda Turbo 6 or Accord, I would Accord 2.0T. The Accord handles better, it accelerates faster, it's a little bit quieter, and it's roomier than the Mazda 6, but the Mazda 6 is very, very pretty. So can't go wrong with the Mazda 6, but personally I would Accord. Which brand do you think has the greatest reliability? I would say Toyota. Toyota is definitely the easy answer there. But I would say if you're looking for reliability with extra features, then you could find good reliability in another brand. It may not be where Toyota is, but Toyota is one of the few companies that has solid reliability time after time after time and very, very few mistakes. If you look at Honda, Honda has solid reliability, but Honda makes mistakes now and then, just as any company could. But predictable reliability, definitely Toyota. I wouldn't be concerned at all about even new Toyota products. So the new RAV4, first model year, I don't expect there are going to be any reliability issues with that model either. CX-5 Forester, RAV4 for comfy ride. The CX-5 is definitely going to be firm. The comfiest ride is going to be in the Forester in that segment right there. Why should I get a Lexus ES over a Toyota Avalon other than the Lexus logo? That would be the big reason, would be the Lexus logo. It's going to be a little bit quieter, but it's not going to be a huge deal. You cannot get real wood in both. If you want the real wood, you're going to get the Lexus. You're also going to have slightly better leather in the Lexus, a slightly longer warranty, a better dealer experience, the brand cachet of having the Lexus logo on the front. But other than that, they're not too far apart. Is the Pilot 6-speed better than the 9-speed? Better is a really interesting term. The 9-speed will give you better fuel economy and better acceleration. So better than the 6-speed, maybe. Shift quality is not going to be as good as the 6-speed. Overt reliability has not proven to actually be any different. So better, it depends on exactly what you're after. What are my personal cars? Personal cars, again, are a Durango, Soul EV, and an old Grand Cherokee. Any opinions on the Infiniti Q50? Q50 is a good, solid value in that segment. It typically sells below MSRP, solid engine lineup, high reliability, big back seat. If you're looking for a roomy entry in that segment, it's going to be a solid buy. best in that segment, I wouldn't necessarily go there with the Q50. There are options that I would buy in front of the Q50, but there's a reason that the Infiniti sells so well in that segment. It's just a good buy. Good fuel economy and decent price for winter driving. If you're concerned about snow traction, I would look at something like a Subaru with the standard all-wheel drive. That's definitely going to be a win there. Looking for an SUV with slightly better ride quality but still good power. Currently in a GS350 Sport. Thoughts on X5, Grand Cherokee, etc. The Grand Cherokee is going to be less expensive than the X5, obviously, but both of those are going to give you better power than what you're seeing in your GS, really. When we review the Forte GT, we should be seeing that somewhat soon. Outlander plug-in hybrid, we have a review on that. You can see my thoughts on the Outlander plug-in. I was a little bit disappointed, to be perfectly honest, in the Outlander. Now that Toyota's going to have Android Auto, will existing 2019 models be updated? We don't know yet. Toyota has either been cagey about saying they don't think so, or just not commenting at all. So my bet would be probably not, but there's a possibility. There's a little ray of hope there. Is Apple CarPlay worth it? I've heard that it's very buggy in the Mazdas. Yes, it's not exactly as smooth as I would like. The big thing is not necessarily buggy because, but the problem with the Mazda system as well as the Toyota system is that it just takes a long time for CarPlay to start. So you start the car, you drive down the road, you're driving for maybe a mile or two, and then CarPlay starts. So that's my big problem with CarPlay there. And sometimes the controls are a little slow at the startup. Let's see here. Do we know when the VW crossover will get the cheaper than Tiguan in America, and when? I don't know. Volkswagen seems to be going in a few different scatterbrain directions there. They're doing a lot of EV development right now, so we might see it after their new EVs, but I'm not too sure. Let's see here. Which of the big SUVs has the most comfortable ride? Suburban, Yukon, Expedition? I would say the Expedition. Opinion of the Honda Accord Coupe V6 reliability. The Accord's been very reliable, so I wouldn't have any problems there. But of course, you're talking about a used car because it's they don't make that one anymore. Recently traded in a Mini Cooper S. Thought BMW resolved electrical issues. Third Mini a mistake. As I've always said, if you want reliability, you buy Asian first, American second, and then European last. So if you actually care about total reliability metrics, that's sort of the order there. And that applies to Mini just as much as BMW. Remember that any lower volume car company is going to have more likelihood of errors, and any low volume company really is the key here. Big thing here would be if Honda had, or Toyota produced had a design flaw in an Accord or a RAV4 or a CR-V, and that design flaw was caught after 50,000 units. That means that design flaw is going to get caught within the first few months of that model going on sale, because 400,000 RAV4s get sold a year, 400,000 CR-Vs, 400,000 Nissan Rogues. They're going to find that design flaw pretty fast if it's something that's noticeable immediately. But if it's a design flaw that is affecting a small percentage and it takes 50,000 units to statistically get you there, and you're BMW, then that could take years with some models to find it, or with Minis, definitely years. So that's one of the big things to remember with reliability on the mainstream brands. They're going to find that problem a little sooner. And they're also, in some ways, incentivized to go hunting for them in a way as well, because there's so many more cars that we're talking about. Remember that everything that BMW and Mini sell in the US put together does not even reach what the Toyota RAV4 sells. So Toyota sells more RAV4s than BMW sells of absolutely everything in the US. So that's an important thing to keep in mind there. How reliable are Hyundai new cars? Hyundai's actually typically been right up there with Honda and Toyota, so I wouldn't worry about them as far as reliability. Torn between new Santa Fe CX-5 and CR-V. Santa Fe, if you want the room, I think CR-V is a well-rounded option, especially if you want better fuel economy. Is Mitsubishi 2.4 as reliable as Kia 2.4 since they share the same design? The global engine design. The Mitsubishi 2.4 is not the same engine as the Hyundai Kia 2.4, especially the current generation one. They share some common design themes, but they're not the same engine. That's the important thing to remember there. So overall reliability has not necessarily been bad, pardon me, in the Mitsubishi, but it's probably going to be better in the Hyundai Kia 2.4. Honda Insight or Toyota Corolla. If you care about, I'm assuming you're talking about Corolla Hybrid. If you care about fuel economy, Corolla. If you care about performance or features, Insight. And that would be the split there. Super handling all-wheel drive, worth it to purchase over Lexus all-wheel drive vehicle. TLX versus GS350. The GS350 is going to be the more dynamic option, hands down, absolutely. The TLX, remember, not only is the TLX a front-wheel drive biased vehicle, even with super handling all-wheel drive, but it also is front-heavy. So neutral handling situations, when the power's off, the GS is going to outhandle the TLX. And in power-on situations, the GS will still outhandle the TLX because it can send more power to the rear. Super handling all-wheel drive is great marketing, and it's also a great all-wheel drive system in its segment. So if you're comparing TLX against S60, TLX against Buick Regal, things like that, TLX against Lexus ES, the super handling all-wheel drive system has some definite true advantages there. But compared against a rear-wheel drive all-wheel drive system, the advantages, generally speaking, disappear. Has Alpha's reliability improved? Alpha's reliability seems to have improved in their base models, but their performance models definitely still seem to have a few kinks in there. Any word on the Volkswagen Airton? We have no idea when that's coming. Does not appear to be anytime soon, although they are showing it still at auto shows, which I am always surprised by. Best aftermarket double-din radio. I quite like Pioneer's double-din radios, but I will let you all explore on your own there. Moving along, let's see here. On paper, the Explorer is wider than anything else in its class. Is it really noticeable in city driving? I would say no, because there are plenty of really wide vehicles out there. It's probably not going to be noticeable in city driving. The big reason the Explorer seems to be wider is because they've designed it to accommodate very wide wheels and tires for the performance options, and the difference in width is not extraordinary in the Explorer. When are we reviewing the Cadillac XT4? Actually, that video should be in process very soon. Our editor should start editing that next week, and we'll have it up soon. But I can tell you in advance that I liked the XT4 an awful lot more than I thought I would as far as the interior, the design. I've always liked Cadillac's exterior design, but I am disappointed in the pricing. The XT4 is fantastically expensive. You can get the XT4 up to thousands and thousands of dollars more than a BMW X1 or a Volvo XC40 or an Audi Q3, which actually shocked me. Generally speaking, the way that I like to deal with our reviews is I will not look at the price tag on the car at all. I won't do any of the pricing research until after I've driven the car for a few days. So I did that with the XT4, and I was thinking to myself, gosh, this is a great little car. I really like this compared to the other entries to the segment. There's some definite solid reasons why you might want to get one. And then I saw the price tag and I was shocked because the model that we were driving was high $50,000. It was very, very expensive. And the overall performance is actually below the BMW X2, the XC40, etc. So that's my problem there. Although, now that said, the XT4 is likely going to be selling at a greater discount at the dealers. So when you go to the Cadillac dealer, probably going to give you more cash on the hood. And the lease prices are very competitive. So at that point, the pricing becomes less important. Solid option, I would say it depends on the deal. Which companies have the smoothest radar cruise control systems? I would say that's generally going to be the luxury segment. So Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Volvo are all very consistent as far as their overall radar cruise control smoothness. Next would be Toyota. Toyota actually makes a very, very good radar adaptive system. My least favorite ones would probably be the Honda system in some of their vehicles. They've issued software updates that have made them smoother, but generally the Honda systems are not as smooth as the others. The Subaru EyeSight system is not as smooth as some of the competition. And the rest of them sort of fill out the middle there. That'd be my opinion there. What are the first models that will get Skyactiv X beyond the 3? Supposedly it will be an upcoming, as of yet unnamed crossover that is going to be released in Geneva next week. We're hearing the rumors that that will probably be the CX-4. basically a BMW X6 styled CX-5. Opinion on Hyundai crossover truck. I'm excited because I really think that Hyundai could do some interesting business with a truck. It's probably not going to sell hugely well in America because so far we haven't seen a true truck competitor to the main entries here. So the Ridgeline is not as rugged as a Tacoma. The Titan and the Tundra are not as efficient as the Americans. They don't come in all the flavors as the Americans, etc. There are definite reasons that you would buy a Silverado, a GMC Sierra, an F-150, or a Ram over those other options. So my worry with the Hyundai crossover truck would be it's going to be a Ridgeline. The Ridgeline doesn't sell necessarily that well. Instead, I wish that they would go a different route and take something like the Kia Borrego, their old body-on-frame SUV that the Hyundai Kia Motor Group had. Take the frame out of that one, the V8 engine, the 8-speed automatic transmission, and stick that under a mid-sized truck that was a real truck and had a real V8 engine and gave us good fuel economy in that segment that was truly focused on fuel economy with a combination of capability. I think that would be interesting for me, but until then, I'm not so sold on their unibody truck concept. And the same goes for the Volkswagen Atlas pickup truck. Interesting, cutesy concept. I just don't know if it's going to sell well in the US. Do we think the RAV4 Hybrid will get Android Auto? The answer is definitely no, because they've already released the RAV4 Hybrid. We already know exactly what it's going to get, and it is not going to get Android Auto, at least at the beginning, maybe later, but we don't know whether it will be upgradable. Can we realistically expect a Volkswagen microbus? Probably a long way from now. There's comments that it may be riding on their new electric architecture, but until then, we don't really know. Do we know if a Nissan Frontier is coming soon? I would hope so, but we haven't heard much of a peep out of them. Best all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive for under $20,000. Your options are very limited under $20,000. So you're basically looking at either subcompact vehicles like an HRV or a CX-3 or a Subaru. So best value probably would be the Subaru. Q5 or X3, which one do I recommend? I like the infotainment system in the Q5 a lot, and I like the practical cargo area, but the X3 is a sharper handling vehicle, and I also think it's actually a good buy, too. I would say if you're looking at the Q5, if you're leaning Q5, cross-shop the Acura RDX with it. If you're leaning X3, then I would say definitely stay on the X3 side there. Any word on a new WRX? No, we have not heard anything, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's not too likely. Or at least not in the way that some WRX fans might want. The reason there is fuel economy regulations in America, and Subarus need to focus on those, getting all their vehicles up to those fuel economy standards, and maybe once they're there, they'll have a refocus on that, but I wouldn't expect too much out of that at this point in time. Who has the best auto transmission below $50,000? I would actually say if you're looking rear-wheel drive, that would definitely be the ZF. If you're looking at a front-wheel drive vehicle, I actually think that the Honda 10-speed is the best, although we don't find it in very many vehicles. The big one out there, of course, in most 8-speed automatics, front-wheel drive or front-wheel drive biased, is going to be the Aisin transmission. Let's see here. When does Telluride and Palisade go on sale? We don't know exactly, but Telluride should be on sale in April, is my guess there. But I don't know about the Palisade just yet. Let's see here. Which American pickup truck would you prefer at the moment? RAV4. And when will FCA reintroduce the Dodge Magnum? Probably the 12th of never. Wagons don't sell well in the U.S., so that's going to be, a hard sell, I think. Favorite car? I think one interesting thing is that, I don't have a favorite car anymore. I drive them all, so favorite cars go out of the way after a while. Someone's asking here, want a Model 3, but all-wheel drive long range, not until 2021. What do you think the depreciation will be? We don't know, actually, on the Model 3. Model 3 initial depreciation seems to be minimal or non-existent, actually. So, but that could be just supply and demand because supply is constricted and demand is relatively high at the moment. What will it be until in 2021? We just really don't know at the moment. It could be good, it could be not good, we don't know. I would say that we should look to the Model S and Model X for depreciation curves on those. And once the full production gets going and everybody that's wanting one is able to get one in a reasonable order, then we'll know what the depreciation will be. Do Americans buy pickup trucks for no reason other than the look? Of course they do. It's interesting. The automotive research indicates that one of the most important factors when buying a new vehicle is styling. It's not safety, it's not fuel economy. Styling actually overrides most of those. So, and truck styling is definitely in. So that's definitely a big reason there. Why do you think U.S. likes to buy black and white and gray vehicles? I've heard a lot of reasons about the white vehicles. White vehicles tend to not show dirt quite as easily. Black vehicles, people like the black classy look, but I don't like the swirl marks personally. I would never buy a black vehicle. And gray doesn't show dust very well either, so that's the reason that those are purchased. A lot of people are very practical in those reasons. Am I going to Geneva? No, I am skipping Geneva. Thoughts on the Chevy Equinox diesel? Just does not seem to make a good financial case for itself. I would get the turbocharged engines. When is Genesis supposed to release their first SUV? That should be coming up here soon. Okay to buy a used car from a rental car company? That's an interesting question. I bought a car from a rental car company once, and the only weird thing there would be the maintenance might be somewhat regular, but it can also be slapdash and sporadic. I had a fuel tank leak in a car purchased from a rental car company once, and they had serviced the fuel tank sending unit improperly and hadn't sealed right, so it was leaking gas down. You might have some of those weird problems, and there's no real way to know what other people did in rental cars. I would say think about how you treat a rental car and then ask yourself if you would want your car to be treated that way. That would be the big thing there. But they can be really good deals. Do I know anything about ticking noise in the Mustang GT? No, your dealer would probably be the best one there. Is the Kia Telluride 3.8 the same one as the old Hyundai Veracruz? That is a good question. The most information that I've been able to get is no, that the new 3.8 is based on the 3.3, which is quasi-related to the old 3.8, but that this is a new engine with all their latest fuel-saving stuff on it. It can run on the Atkinson cycle, so it has full variable valve timing, etc. This one was designed to be more fuel efficient, and it definitely seems to be. When you look at the Telluride and the Palisade's fuel economy numbers, they're definitely right in line with the rest of the competition. Even though most of those competitors are quite a bit smaller than the Telluride. So that actually bodes well. And the Telluride is pretty square, so aerodynamics are definitely not getting it to that fuel economy number. Will Toyota integrate Mazda Skyactiv X within its hybrid system? Unlikely. I don't think Mazda is going to license Skyactiv X to anybody anytime soon. Quattro versus super handling all-wheel drive, Passport versus Q5 in snow. Q5 is probably going to be the better option, but remember, tires are going to play a much bigger role than the all-wheel drive system. The Q5 has a true center differential in some editions. I'm assuming you're not, well, I'm assuming you're talking about the most recent one, actually, which the Q5 would actually have their newer Quattro Plus system, which would be front-wheel drive mainly. But that said, the Q5 is going to have a mechanical system that's going to be able to send more power to the rear more reliably than what we see in super handling all-wheel drive. Let's see here. Vet or M2? I would probably M2. I like the refinement of the M2 over what we see in the Corvette, but the Corvette's definitely fun. Audi S4. The S4 is a little bit front-heavy, but I like the Audi all-wheel drive system in that. I really like all-wheel drive, so that would definitely be a selling factor for me. Neutral handling is not going to be quite as good as some of the others, but the overall feel is definitely still good. Thoughts on the Audi Q8? I'm surprised that the Q8 didn't end up being a 3-row. I kind of thought it would maybe be an X7, but it's not. It's sort of like Hyundai Santa Fe formula applied to a luxury vehicle instead of bigger Q7, which is kind of what I thought it might be. Let's see here. According to Wikipedia, Telluride and Veracruz had the same Lambda 2 V6. It is not quite the same. It has been massaged, so they're all related. The question is, how related is it? And that we don't know yet. But I will be asking the drivetrain engineers at the event coming up very soon. So hopefully we can get a better answer on that. The Wikipedia page, I'm assuming, is going just off of assumed information because we actually have not received any public information really on the details of the engine. So that may be corrected later. Auto shows, do I like going or is it just work? It's a lot of work. Let's see, your full test video on the Honda Passport, that should be coming up soon. And I think our last question here has to be Subaru Outback, good, bad, ugly. The Outback is an odd little duck because there's nothing else like the Outback. So if you want an Outback, then you should get an Outback because there's no real alternative. All-wheel drive, off-roadified wagon is just not a big segment in America, strangely. But then when you look at the sales numbers, the Outback sells very well. It actually outsells the Legacy in most months. So that's kind of an interesting twist there. And it's going to get all the latest refreshes from the Subaru Legacy that we just saw out in Chicago. So expect the Outback to be announced here very, very soon, since it's just the wagon version of the other. It's definitely a practical vehicle. I've always loved wagons to begin with. They're the practical, logical SUV alternative. And I'm happy that it sort of still continues. But as far as alternatives, there's not a lot else out there. Let's see here. And I guess we'll take one more here. Anything on the Volvo Electric S40? We have not heard anything there on exactly what is going on there. We have been told, however, by Volvo officially that it will be after the Polestar 2 comes out. So after Polestar has theirs, then we should see a full electric Volvo, but Polestar is going to go first. Now, we don't know whether Volvo will get their plug-in hybrid before the Polestar 2. So I suspect that the XC40 will be available as a plug-in model before the Polestar 2 ships, but a full EV Volvo will come after the full EV Polestar. So with that, I will bid you all a happy weekend, and I will see you all next week. According to my schedule, we should have another live session next Friday, so be sure and stay tuned for that. Hopefully it will actually be on time, so sorry to any of you who have stuck around this whole time. The live show was a little bit late because we've had internet issues here, so hopefully those have all been resolved, and I will see you all next week. If I can actually